Hello there, and welcome to Midnight Geography. Tonight we'll drift into the landscapes of Oregon, where the Earth reveals its patient work across millennia. Oregon is not simply a place on a map. It is a conversation between ancient volcanic fires and persistent ocean waves, between rainforests and high deserts that somehow share the same latitude. It is land that refuses singular definition, where lava flows froze mid-journey 10,000 years ago and still wait in silence, where underground rivers carve cathedrals no human eye has seen, where coastlines shift with each winter storm yet remain fundamentally unchanged. If you enjoy these peaceful geographical explorations, consider liking and subscribing. It helps other curious minds find their way here too. But for now, let's begin. Crater Lake rests in southern Oregon, like a bowl of liquid sapphire cradled by ancient volcanic walls. 7,700 years ago, Mount Mazama stood here as a towering peak until the mountain collapsed into its own emptied magma chamber, creating a caldera that would slowly fill with nothing but rain and snowmelt. Nearly 2,000 feet deep, it holds almost 5 trillion gallons of water so pure that light penetrates further here than in almost any other lake on Earth. The deep blue you see is not reflection, but absorption. All wavelengths of light except blue being swallowed by depth and clarity. No streams feed this lake. No rivers drain it. It simply exists in quiet equilibrium with the sky above, receiving what falls and releasing nothing except what evaporates. In winter, the rim accumulates 40 feet of snow, while the lake itself never freezes, its depth holding warmth like memory holds the past, defying the cold that surrounds it. The Alvord Desert spreads across southeastern Oregon like a forgotten ocean floor, which is precisely what it once was. This playa, a term meaning beach in Spanish, though no waves break here now, stretches 12 miles long and 7 miles wide at 4,000 feet elevation. During wet seasons, shallow water covers the basin, creating a mirror that reflects surrounding mountains with perfect stillness. Then summer arrives and the water vanishes, leaving behind cracked mud patterns geometric and precise, a mathematics written by evaporation. The desert sits in the rain shadow of Steens Mountain, receiving perhaps 7 inches of rain annually, enough to tease, but never to sustain. Ancient peoples camped along its edges when the basin held deeper waters. Now it hosts mostly silence and wind, the kind of emptiness that makes you aware of space itself as something tangible. When rare rains do come, the transformation happens quickly. Dust becomes reflection, earth becomes sky, and for a few weeks the desert remembers being a lake. Shore Acres State Park perches on cliffs where the Pacific Ocean demonstrates its patience and its violence in equal measure. A timber baron named Louis Simpson built gardens here in 1906, importing exotic plants from across the world to this unlikely perch 7 stories above the sea. During summer, the gardens bloom in cultivated beauty, but winter reveals the coast's true character. Storm waves, some reaching 100 feet tall, crash against the cliffs with force that shakes the ground, spray reaching the garden itself despite the elevation. The juxtaposition strikes you immediately. Delicate roses and carefully pruned hedges existing mere yards from oceanic fury that could erase them in an instant. Yet the gardens persist, replanted when necessary, maintained by those who understand that beauty and chaos can coexist. The basalt cliffs beneath have withstood these waves for 15 million years. The gardens, by comparison, are barely a whisper, yet they endure through human stubbornness and care, a different kind of persistence than geological time, but persistence nonetheless. The Wallowa Mountains rise in northeastern Oregon like an island of granite and ice in a sea of high plateau. Here, in what locals call the Alps of Oregon, more than 50 glacial lakes rest in cirques and valleys carved by ice that retreated 12,000 years ago, but left its signature everywhere. Eagle Cap, the range's highest point at 9,500 feet, still maintains permanent ice, despite sitting at 45 degrees north latitude, the same parallel as northern Italy. The lakes themselves hold different personalities, some shallow and warm enough for summer swimming, others deep and cold, holding snow on their shores into July. Glaciers carve these basins with patient violence, grinding stone into fine silt that gives certain lakes their turquoise color, rock flour suspended in meltwater like paint in water. The Wallowas remain remote enough that many lakes see few visitors, their waters reflecting mountains and sky in solitude, unchanged since the ice departed, except for the slow work of sediment filling them grain by grain, century by century. Beneath the high desert city of Bend, rivers of stone once flowed in darkness and heat, leaving behind corridors through which you can now walk in the coolness of 42 degrees. Lava River Cave stretches over a mile through basalt, its walls frozen ripples from molten rock that moved here perhaps 80,000 years ago. When flowing lava forms a crust on its surface while liquid continues moving beneath, tubes like this can form, hollow spaces where geology creates architecture more dramatic than anything built by human hands. The ceiling shows where drips of lava hung molten before cooling mid-fall, and in some chambers, second flows entered the tube, creating layers of different colored stone. The temperature never varies, winter or summer, day or night. The cave maintains its constant chill, a natural refrigerator carved by fire. Walking through these passages, you move through spaces that existed before humans reached this continent, hallways that knew darkness absolute until we arrived with our lights to see what the earth had made in secret. The John Day fossil beds preserve 40 million years of time in hillsides painted with colors no artist would dare combine: reds and yellows, golds and blacks, each layer representing a different epoch, a different climate, a different world. Here, paleontologists have discovered forests that grew when Oregon sat at tropical latitudes, creatures that seem assembled from imagination, rhinoceroses and saber-toothed cats, ancient horses no larger than dogs, and creatures called oreodonts that have no modern equivalent, gone entirely from the earth. The beds contain not just bones but leaves, seeds, entire ecosystems compressed into stone and exposed again by erosion. Each colored layer tells a story of volcanic ash falls that buried living things so quickly that soft tissues sometimes preserved before decay could claim them. The Painted Hills section displays this most dramatically. Striped slopes where morning and evening light transforms the colors, making them glow as if lit from within. Standing before these hills, you're not looking at scenery, but at time itself made visible, millions of years stacked like pages in a book written in stone. Steens Mountain rises from the Alvord Desert in a single sweep of 5,000 feet, the largest fault block mountain in North America, an entire section of the Earth's crust tilted upward along a crack in the planet's skin. From the desert floor, where sagebrush struggles in heat and aridity, you can drive or hike to the summit at 9,700 feet where alpine conditions prevail, where snow lingers into July, and plants grow low to escape the wind. The eastern face drops away in cliffs and cirques carved by vanished glaciers, while the western slope rises gradually through aspen groves and meadows. This asymmetry defines fault block mountains. one side broken and lifted, the other sloping gently. The mountain creates its own weather, wringing moisture from air masses that cross its heights, supporting communities of plants and animals that have no business existing in a region so dominated by desert. Standing on its summit, you can see forever. To the south, alkali flats stretching white to the horizon. To the north, more ranges marching into distance. Below, the Alvord like a mirror or a void, depending on the season and your perspective. The Columbia River Gorge cuts through the Cascade Range for 80 miles, the only sea level passage through these mountains, a gap that funnels wind with such consistency and force that the gorge has become synonymous with wind itself. Air rushing through this gap averages 35 miles per hour and sometimes exceeds 70. Winds strong enough to lean into, to fight against. Winds that shape trees and erode stone and make the river's surface dance in patterns of white. The gorge formed through a combination of uplift and erosion, the Cascades rising, while the Columbia maintained its course, cutting downward as fast as the mountains rose, a rare example of a river that refused to be defeated by tectonic forces. Waterfalls line both walls where tributary streams meet the main channel, plunging from hanging valleys carved by smaller glaciers into the deeper trench carved by the Columbia's ice and water. The gorge serves as a botanical boundary where wet western forests meet dry eastern grasslands, creating conditions where species from different worlds grow within sight of each other, rainforest and desert sharing the same canyon. Newberry National Volcanic Monument encompasses over 400 square miles of volcanic features so diverse that geologists use it as a teaching landscape. Here a cinder cone, there a shield volcano. Elsewhere obsidian flows black and sharp enough to cut skin even after 13 centuries. The Big Obsidian Flow erupted just 1,300 years ago, which means Native Americans watched it happen, watched the earth open and glass pour forth, watched it cool into a surface that reflects sunlight in angles sharp and dark. Obsidian forms when lava cools so quickly that crystals have no time to form, creating natural glass that ancient peoples valued for tools and weapons, trading it across great distances. The monument also contains Newberry Crater itself, a caldera holding two lakes separated by a pumice cone, Paulina and East Lakes, each with different chemistry and character. Lava tubes tunnel through the monument's foundations, caves and passages where you can descend into the Earth's recent work and see where stone flowed like water, where heat shaped corridors and chambers, where the planet's interior made itself temporarily exterior before cooling into permanence. Crater Lake's water allows visibility up to 140 feet deep, approaching the clarity of distilled water, purity that exists because the lake has no inlet streams to carry sediment or nutrients. This clarity creates the lake's famous deep blue color. Light penetrates so far that red and yellow wavelengths are absorbed completely, leaving only blue to return to the surface and to our eyes. Scientists have discovered unique bacteria in the lake's depths, organisms adapted to darkness, cold, and pressure, living where sunlight becomes merely a rumor. The lake's isolation has also meant that until recently it contained no fish. It was stocked with trout decades ago, an experiment now considered a mistake because these fish altered the lake's ecology, consuming zooplankton that once kept the water even clearer. Some summers, algae bloom slightly in warming surface waters, a visible consequence of changing climate. But mostly, the lake remains as it has been for millennia, impossibly blue, impossibly clear, impossibly deep, water cupped in volcanic stone, reflecting sky while holding darkness. The Oregon Coast Range catches moisture from Pacific storms like a net catches fish. Some valleys, receiving 200 inches of rainfall annually, more than 16 feet of rain. This abundance creates temperate rainforests where Sitka spruce grow over 300 feet tall, their trunks so massive that several people linking hands cannot encircle them. These forests operate on different principles than drier ecosystems. Here, nurse logs function as gardens, fallen trees supporting entire communities of seedlings, ferns, and fungi, death becoming the foundation for new life. The canopy grows so thick that the forest floor remains dim even at midday, moss covering every surface in green velvet inches thick. Streams run year-round, fed by the forest's ability to hold water in soil and vegetation, releasing it gradually, even during summer's drier months. Walking through these forests, you're surrounded by the sound of water, dripping from leaves, flowing in creeks, absorbed by moss, and by a green so pervasive that light itself seems colored by it. Photosynthesis made visible through sheer abundance of life. Table Rock stands near Medford as a monument to volcanic plumbing, a plug of resistant andesite that once formed the throat of a volcano 7 million years ago. The softer cone that once surrounded this core has eroded away entirely, leaving only the hardened lava that filled the conduit, a tower of stone rising 2,000 feet above the valley floor. Geologists call these formations volcanic necks or plugs, and they occur worldwide, but few are as dramatically isolated as Table Rock. The rock's flat top, hence the name, supports a unique ecosystem, plants adapted to shallow soils and exposure to wind and sun. Native peoples use the summit for vision quests and ceremonies, the elevation and isolation lending themselves to spiritual practice. In spring, wildflowers cover the top despite the harsh conditions, life finding purchase in cracks and shallow depressions where soil accumulates grain by grain, year by year. The rock itself remains largely unchanged, resistant to erosion that claimed the mountain around it, standing now as geology's equivalent of a fossil, the preserved center of a volcano that no longer exists except as this single vertical reminder. The Deschutes River begins at Little Lava Lake as water seeping from the ground, emerging from porous volcanic rock where it has traveled underground for years or decades, filtered by stone into remarkable purity. From this modest spring, the river flows 252 miles to meet the Columbia, dropping through canyons, over waterfalls, past fishing camps, and hydroelectric dams. What makes the Deschutes unusual is its consistency. Water temperature varies little throughout the year, staying between 42 and 48 degrees, whether in January or July. This constancy comes from the river's groundwater origins, water insulated from seasonal temperature swings by its passage through deep volcanic aquifers. The stable conditions make the Deschutes exceptional, habitat for trout and salmon, fish that evolved in cold waters and struggle when streams warm with summer heat. The river's name comes from French, Rivière des Chutes, river of falls, though most of these falls have been harnessed now for power generation, their energy captured, their wild plunges reduced to controlled releases through turbines. Haystack Rock towers 235 feet above Cannon Beach as one of the world's most photographed geological features, a sea stack that resists erosion, while softer stone around it surrenders to waves. The rock formed from lava that reached the ocean 15 million years ago, cooling into hard basalt that would prove more durable than the surrounding sedimentary layers. As waves cut into the coastline, they exploited weaknesses in softer rock, leaving harder formations standing isolated like sentinels. Haystack Rock hosts a community adapted to its verticality. Tufted puffins nest on its summit, mussels and barnacles coat its lower reaches. tide pools at its base contain worlds entire of anemones, sea stars, crabs, and fish. The rock changes character with the tide, approachable at low water, surrounded at high tide, always dramatic. Each winter storm removes more sand from around its base, exposing boulders that will eventually become sea stacks themselves when haystack finally falls, which it will, inevitably, waves being more patient than stone, water outlasting rock through sheer persistence and time. The Metolius River appears fully formed from the earth at the base of Black Butte, emerging as a substantial stream from springs that produce 50,000 gallons per minute, enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool every 2 minutes. The water traveled through porous volcanic rock for decades before reaching this outlet, filtered by stone into clarity that reveals every pebble on the riverbed. The springs maintain constant temperature and flow, creating habitats so stable that native fish species evolved specifically to these conditions, adapted to water that never warms beyond the low 50s, never floods in spring, or slows in summer. The Metolius flows through ponderosa pine forests, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows, its course remarkably straight for a natural river, following the path of least resistance through volcanic terrain. Fly fishers prize the river for its beauty and difficulty. The clear water means fish can see them as easily as they see the fish, requiring stealth and skill. The river's name comes from the Sahaptin word for spawning salmon, though dams downstream have complicated that ancient relationship, fish struggling now to reach waters that once welcomed them without barrier. Fort Rock rises from Central Oregon's high desert like a broken crown. A volcanic tuff ring, 325 feet tall, formed 100,000 years ago, when magma met water in explosive violence. The eruption occurred beneath an ancient lake, steam and ash, creating a circular rampart around the vent, walls that cooled into stone strong enough to persist long after the lake evaporated. The ring remains incomplete. Wave action from that vanished lake eroded gaps in the southern wall before the water disappeared, creating the fort-like appearance that gives the rock its name. Inside this natural amphitheater, archaeologists discovered sandals woven from sagebrush bark, dated to 13,000 years ago, among the oldest footwear found in North America. The people who made those sandals lived when this basin held water, when the climate was cooler and wetter, when Ice Age megafauna still roamed these valleys. Now, Fort Rock stands in desert, surrounded by sagebrush and dust, a monument equally to volcanic fury and to the humans who witnessed its aftermath, who walked these lands when the geography was fundamentally different, who adapted as the world dried and warmed around them. The painted hills display geology as art, their slopes striped in reds and yellows and golds and blacks, each color representing different conditions during the Eocene epoch, 35 million years ago. Red layers formed in warm, dry periods when iron oxides concentrated in soil. Yellow and gold indicate wetter times when minerals weathered differently. Black layers are lignite, compressed plant material from swampy periods. The hills change appearance with moisture and light. After rain, colors intensify dramatically. At sunrise and sunset, low-angle light makes them glow as if illuminated from within. These claystones formed from volcanic ash that fell into floodplains and lakes, accumulating over millions of years, layer upon layer, until erosion began exposing them, revealing time in bands horizontal and precise. Walking among the painted hills, you're surrounded by deep time made visible, by climate change measured in eras rather than decades, by a world that existed before ice ages, before the Cascades rose to their current heights, when Oregon was subtropical and strange, populated by creatures that would seem alien now. Plants that have no modern descendants, ecosystems entire that vanished completely, leaving only these colored soils as evidence they ever existed at all. Smith Rock rises from the high desert near Terrebonne in cliffs 600 feet tall, composed of welded volcanic ash that erupted 30 million years ago. The ash fell hot enough that particles fused together, creating stone stronger than typical ash deposits, strong enough to form vertical walls that resist erosion. The Crooked River carved through this formation, creating a canyon whose walls now host over 1,800 documented climbing routes, Smith Rock having become one of America's premier climbing destinations. The rock's surface shows bands and layers, different ash flows stacked over time, each eruption adding to the formation before cooling and compression turned ash into stone. Basalt caps some formations where lava flowed over the ash, creating harder layers that protect softer tuff beneath. The colors range from gray to orange to cream, varying with mineral content and weathering. At sunrise, the rocks glow warm and golden. At midday, they bleach pale in harsh light. At sunset, they turn deep red. The desert around them supports junipers and sagebrush, vegetation adapted to perhaps 10 inches of annual rain, plants that measure growth in decades rather than seasons, that survive through conservative water use and deep roots, that make this apparently barren landscape their permanent home, finding abundance where casual observers see only stone and drought. The Willamette Valley stretches 150 miles from Eugene north to Portland, a fertile lowland between the Coast Range and the Cascades, its rich soil the result of catastrophe. During the last ice age, glacial Lake Missoula in Montana periodically broke through ice dams, releasing floods of biblical proportion, walls of water carrying icebergs and boulders, moving with such force that they scoured eastern Washington's channeled scablands before backing up into the Willamette Valley. These floods, occurring dozens of times over thousands of years, deposited sediment hundreds of feet deep in places, silt and clay carried from Montana and eastern Washington, laid down in layers that would become some of the most productive agricultural soil in North America. The valley's climate adds to its fertility, mild, wet winters and warm, dry summers creating conditions ideal for diverse crops. Before agriculture, the valley floor was prairie maintained by burning, native peoples managing the landscape to encourage camas and other food plants, creating open grasslands that gave way to oak savannas on valley edges. Now it's one of America's most intensively farmed regions, its original character largely transformed, though remnants of the old prairie persist in protected areas where native plants still bloom in spring, where you can glimpse what the valley was before floods created the conditions that would make it irresistible to farmers seeking rich soil in moderate climate. Proxy Falls drops 226 feet through the Mackenzie River country in two separate cascades that demonstrate how water and lava interact over time. The falls split around a resistant outcrop before plunging over basalt cliffs into pools that seem like they should collect water, but don't. Instead, the water vanishes into porous lava rock at the base, percolating underground to re-emerge miles away in springs that feed the Mackenzie River. The entire area rests on young lava flows, perhaps 1,500 years old, stone so recent in geological terms that soil development remains minimal, trees growing wherever cracks and depressions allow root purchase. The falls exist because water finds this particular route through the fractured lava, but that route could change. Earthquakes might shift the rock, creating new passages, closing old ones. For now, the water falls in two silver ribbons through forest green and permanent, mist creating microclimates where ferns and mosses grow luxuriant, where the air feels several degrees cooler than surrounding forest, where the sound of falling water drowns out everything else, making the falls not just a visual destination, but an acoustic one, a place where water's voice dominates all other sensation. The Owyhee Canyonlands spread across southeastern Oregon in more than 2.5 million acres of sagebrush steppe and volcanic plateaus cut by canyons reaching 1,000 feet deep, one of the least visited wilderness areas in America, despite, or perhaps because of, its vastness and remoteness. The canyons themselves remain hidden until you're nearly upon them, the plateau giving no hint of the depth carved below until you stand at the rim and look down into shadows. Water accomplished this excavation over millions of years, the Owyhee River and its tributaries cutting through layers of basalt and rhyolite, exposing geological history in canyon walls that glow red and orange in morning and evening light. Bighorn sheep navigate these cliffs, and golden eagles nest on ledges inaccessible to predators. The region sees perhaps a few hundred visitors annually, compared to millions who visit more famous destinations, making it one of the last places in the lower 48 where true solitude remains possible. At night, without light pollution for 100 miles in any direction, stars appear in profusion that urban dwellers have never witnessed, the Milky Way casting shadows, silence so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat, emptiness that feels less like absence and more like presence of something too vast for convenient naming. Mount Hood stands at 11,240 feet, visible from Portland on clear days, its white pyramid dominating the eastern horizon like a promise or a warning, depending on your perspective. 11 named glaciers cling to its slopes, rivers of ice moving at speeds measured in inches per year, grinding stone into fine powder, carving cirques and valleys through processes too slow for human perception but inexorable over centuries. Elliott Glacier stretches longest, over a mile of ice descending Hood's northern flank, though it retreats measurably each year, losing dozens of feet annually as the climate warms. The glaciers feed rivers that provide drinking water to communities below, natural reservoirs that store winter snow and release it gradually through summer months. Hood itself last erupted in the 1800s, minor eruptions that sent mud flows down river valleys but didn't approach the violence of its earlier history. The mountain remains an active volcano, dormant but not extinct, fumaroles near the summit releasing sulfurous gases that melt snow in small patches, creating caves in the ice where steam vents heat meets glacial cold. Native peoples considered Hood sacred, a place where spirits dwelled, and stories tell of times when the mountain fought with other peaks, throwing stones and fire, shaking the earth, stories that might preserve memories of actual eruptions witnessed by ancestors who passed them down in narrative rather than written form. The Umpqua River system drains mountains and valleys across southwestern Oregon, its North Fork containing waterfalls, where water drops through narrow basalt gorges carved over millennia. These falls migrate upstream slowly, the process called headward erosion, water undermining rock at the fall's base, causing periodic collapses that move the fall's lip backward at perhaps a foot per century. The river cuts through layered basalt flows, each layer representing a separate eruption, stone stacked like pages in a book that records millions of years of volcanic activity. The Umpqua supports native fish populations, salmon and steelhead, that migrate from the Pacific to spawn in cold headwaters, fish that evolved to navigate these specific currents, to recognize the chemical signature of their birth streams, returning across thousands of miles of ocean to the exact gravel beds where they were born. The river changes character from headwaters to mouth, beginning as mountain stream clear and cold, accumulating tributaries as it descends through forests and valleys, finally broadening into an estuary where fresh water meets salt, creating brackish conditions that support yet another suite of species adapted to this interface between land and sea, between river and ocean. Phantom Ship Island rises in Crater Lake like something conjured from imagination, a jagged formation of volcanic rock that predates the caldera itself, remnant of eruptions that occurred before Mount Mazama's collapse. The island reaches 160 feet above water, its serrated outline resembling a sailing vessel when viewed through morning mist, hence the name given by early visitors who saw its silhouette and thought of ghost ships from maritime legend. The rock represents some of the oldest exposed material in the caldera, perhaps 400,000 years old, harder and more resistant than surrounding formations, which is why it survives while softer material eroded away. In winter, when snow covers the caldera rim and ice sometimes forms near shore, Phantom Ship stands dark against white, a punctuation mark of stone in all that water and snow. The island supports no trees, no soil having accumulated on its steep surfaces, though lichens colonize its rocks and birds occasionally rest there during migrations. It serves as a geological footnote, a reminder that what we see now, the lake, the caldera, the relatively smooth walls, represents only the most recent chapter in a volcanic story that extends back hundreds of thousands of years, that continues still in subtle ways, that will eventually write new chapters we cannot predict. The Three Sisters Wilderness encompasses nearly 300,000 acres surrounding 3 volcanic peaks, all exceeding 10,000 feet elevation, each with slightly different character and geology. South Sister, youngest of the 3, hosts Oregon's most accessible glacier near its 10,358-foot summit, a place where casual hikers can touch permanent ice without technical climbing skills. The sisters began forming roughly 500,000 years ago and remain active. South Sister shows ground deformation that indicates magma movement below, swelling measured in inches annually, a sign that the volcano isn't finished, merely resting. The wilderness contains hundreds of lakes in glacially carved basins, tarns that hold snowmelt in stone bowls, polished smooth by ice that departed 12,000 years ago. Obsidian flows black and volcanic glass cover portions of the wilderness, eruptions recent enough that vegetation struggles to establish itself, soil development requiring more time than has passed since these flows cooled. Lava Lake and Little Lava Lake feed the Deschutes River from their positions in the wilderness, water collecting in volcanic depressions before beginning its journey downstream. The area sees heavy use despite or because of its beauty. Permits now required for certain areas during summer months, an attempt to manage the impact of thousands seeking wilderness experiences, the paradox being that popularity threatens the very solitude people come seeking. Hell's Canyon carves the border between Oregon and Idaho to a depth of nearly 8,000 feet from the peaks above to the Snake River below, making it deeper than the Grand Canyon, though shorter in length and younger in age. The canyon formed through the combination of volcanic plateau uplift and river downcutting, the Snake maintaining its course as the land rose around it, sawing through basalt layers like a blade through wood, slow but patient and ultimately victorious. The canyon's walls expose 2 billion years of geological history, some of the oldest rocks in the Pacific Northwest visible in its depths, where metamorphic formations predate the volcanic flows that cap the canyon rims. The Snake River itself moves with considerable force through this gorge, rapids ranging from challenging to nearly unrunnable. water compressed by narrow passages into standing waves and hydraulics that have claimed lives despite their distance from any ocean. The canyon creates its own climate zones. Desert conditions along the river give way to grasslands at mid-elevation and finally forests near the rim. Temperature and precipitation varying dramatically over vertical distances that would take hours to traverse on foot. Petroglyphs mark canyon walls where ancestors carved symbols whose meanings we can only guess. People who knew this canyon when Ice Age megafauna still roamed, when the climate was cooler and wetter, who left their marks without explanatory text, art, and record combined in figures of bighorn sheep and geometric patterns that might represent maps or cosmology or simple decoration. We cannot know. The Cascade Range contains over 2,000 volcanic vents scattered across its length, cinder cones and shield volcanoes representing millions of years of intermittent activity. Some vents erupted only once, building small cones before going extinct. Others erupted repeatedly, constructing larger edifices layer by layer. Belknap Crater near the Santiam Pass erupted as recently as 1,500 years ago, its lava flows still largely unvegetated, black stone covering the landscape in rough, jagged surfaces that shred boots and make walking difficult. The cones vary in size from perhaps 50 feet tall to several hundred. Perfect circles or ovals when viewed from above, their regularity betraying volcanic origin, even when heavily forested. Many contain small craters at their summits, depressions marking the vent from which ash and cinder erupted, building the cone from the inside out. Some cones show breached walls where lava broke through during eruption, flowing downslope and leaving a gap in the cone's rim. The sheer number of vents demonstrates the region's volcanic nature. This is not stable, ancient terrain, but rather a landscape actively being constructed, interrupted by dormant periods, but fundamentally characterized by fire and molten stone, by the planet's interior making itself exterior through these countless small eruptions that collectively reshape the surface. Multnomah Falls drops 620 feet in two distinct tiers, the most visited natural site in Oregon, its dramatic plunge visible from the historic highway that winds through the Columbia Gorge. The falls flow year-round, though volume varies dramatically. Spring runoff can send 500 cubic feet per second cascading over the basalt lip, while late summer might reduce that to a mere 10. The falls never disappearing entirely thanks to springs that feed the creek even during drought. The basalt over which water falls, formed from lava, flows that erupted from vents in eastern Washington and Oregon, floods of molten stone that followed the Columbia's drainage, filling valleys, burying forests, creating the foundation over which water now pours. A bridge crosses just above the lower tier, allowing visitors to stand surrounded by falling water, mist cool on skin, the sound overwhelming conversation, making you aware that water possesses weight and force and presence beyond the gentle quality we usually attribute to it. The falls have cut back into the cliff face through erosion, the processes continuing though too slowly for individual human lifespans to measure. Eventually, the falls will migrate far enough upstream to significantly change their appearance, but that eventually exists in geological future, time measured in thousands of years, change occurring but at speeds that make human concerns about transformation seem hasty and temporary. The Oregon Caves wind through marble mountains in southern Oregon, 15,000 feet of mapped passages carved through stone that began as limestone on an ancient ocean floor 190 million years ago. Tectonic forces transformed that limestone through heat and pressure, recrystallizing it into marble, then uplifted it above sea level, where rain and snowmelt slightly acidified by soil. Carbon dioxide began dissolving pathways through the rock. The caves grow slowly, flowstone and stalactites adding microscopic layers annually, draperies forming where mineral-rich water sheets down walls, depositing calcite in thin, translucent veils that hang like frozen waterfalls. Some formations resemble organ pipes, others look like fried eggs or petrified waterfalls, imagination finding familiar shapes in mineral deposits accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years. The caves maintain constant temperature and humidity, creating habitat for species adapted to darkness, cave crickets, millipedes, bats that hibernate in deeper passages where temperature remains stable, even during surface winters. Early explorers carved initials in formations, unfortunate vandalism now protected as historical artifacts themselves, evidence of human tendency to mark presence even in places whose beauty depends partly on their unmarked, pristine quality. The caves continue forming, water still percolating through marble, still dissolving pathways, still depositing minerals, working on timescales that make human history appear instantaneous. Saddle Mountain rises 3,300 feet above the northern Oregon coast, its summit hosting plant species typical of regions 1,000 miles north, botanical relics from Ice Age climates that persist on this isolated peak through quirks of elevation and exposure. During the Pleistocene, when glaciers covered northern latitudes and climate zones shifted southward, alpine and subalpine species colonized mountains far south of their typical range. As the climate warmed and ice retreated, most of these plants withdrew northward, following familiar conditions. But on peaks like Saddle Mountain, elevation provides cooler temperatures and higher precipitation, similar to conditions these species evolved with, allowing them to survive in isolation, separated from their main populations by hundreds of miles of unsuitable lowland habitat. The mountain's geology adds to its uniqueness. It's composed of volcanic rock from undersea eruptions, uplifted and tilted, the same formation visible at Cape Falcon and other coastal headlands. The summit trail climbs through forest that gives way to meadows where wildflowers bloom in profusion during spring. Species with names like Columbia lily and harsh paintbrush, some found nowhere else, having evolved separately from parent populations long enough to develop distinct characteristics. Standing on the summit, you can see waves breaking against coastal cliffs, the Pacific extending to horizon, mountains marching southward, a perspective that encompasses both intimate detail of rare flowers and vast sweep of ocean meeting continent. The Klamath Basin spreads across the Oregon-California border as a landscape defined by water and its absence, by seasonal wetlands that expand and contract depending on rainfall and snowpack. More than 80% of Pacific Flyway waterfowl pass through here annually during migrations, peak concentrations exceeding 6 million birds, ducks and geese in numbers difficult to comprehend, flocks that darken the sky, landings that sound like applause multiplied by thousands. Upper Klamath Lake covers 140 square miles as Oregon's largest natural freshwater lake, shallow enough that winds stir sediments, sometimes giving the water an opaque quality. The lake sits in a graben, a down-dropped block between fault lines, its basin collecting water from surrounding mountains, but having limited outlet capacity. Native peoples harvested wokas, water lily seeds, from the lake for thousands of years, a staple food gathered in late summer when seed pods matured. The basin represents critical habitat in a region where wetlands have been largely drained for agriculture, making remaining marshes disproportionately important for wildlife. The area experiences extremes: summer heat that exceeds 100 degrees, winter cold that freezes marshes solid, winds that blow unchecked across open country. Yet life persists and even thrives in profusion. The basin demonstrating that abundance isn't about gentle conditions, but rather about specific conditions that certain species evolved to exploit, about niches filled by specialists, adapted to circumstances that generalists would find inhospitable. Diamond Craters presents 17,000 acres of volcanic features in Harney County, a textbook landscape where geologists bring students to see examples of mar craters, spatter cones, lava flows, and tuff rings. Essentially, a volcanic feature museum created by nature rather than human curation. The eruptions occurred 25,000 years ago, recent enough that erosion hasn't significantly modified the features, but old enough that any heat dissipated millennia ago. Mar craters formed when magma met groundwater, steam explosions excavating circular pits, now partially filled by seasonal ponds. Spatter cones built up from lava fountaining out of vents, molten rock piling around openings like wax around candle flames. Some features show cross-sections where erosion has carved into cones, revealing internal structure usually hidden, showing how layers of ash and cinder alternate with solidified lava streams. The landscape appears frozen mid-eruption, forms suggesting motion suddenly stopped, lava that looks like it might still be warm despite the centuries and millennia that have passed. Few visitors come here. The craters lie far from major roads, accessible mainly by high clearance, vehicles, and patience. This remoteness preserves the features, protecting them from the wear that comes with heavy visitation, allowing the geology to speak without interpretation signs or guardrails, raw and unmediated, the Earth's work on display without editorial comment. The Columbia River drops only 175 feet over its final 140 miles through Oregon, a gradient so gentle that tidal effects reach upstream dozens of miles from the ocean. This flatness allowed salmon to migrate extraordinary distances, over 1,000 miles inland, to spawning grounds in Idaho and British Columbia, fish swimming against current, but not fighting significant elevation gain until they reached upstream barriers. The Columbia drains an area larger than France, collecting water from 7 states and 1 Canadian province, concentrating it into a single channel that historically carried more water than any other North American river reaching the Pacific. The river's mouth opens into a confluence with the ocean that creates treacherous conditions. The Columbia Bar, called the Graveyard of the Pacific, for the hundreds of vessels wrecked there where river current meets ocean waves, where shifting sandbars and fog combine to create navigation nightmares that challenge even modern technology. Native peoples built an economy around salmon runs so abundant that early explorers described the water as nearly solid with fish, abundance difficult to imagine now after dams, overfishing, and habitat loss reduced runs to fractions of historical numbers. The river shaped the region's human history as much as its physical geography, providing transportation route, food source, boundary marker, and eventually hydroelectric power, each use transforming the river, while the river continued its patient work of carrying mountains to the sea, particle by particle, year by year. Silver Falls State Park contains 10 waterfalls exceeding 25 feet height within relatively compact area, making it Oregon's highest concentration of named falls. South Falls drops 177 feet over a basalt amphitheater where the trail passes behind the falling water, walking through a space carved by erosion between the cliff face and the falling curtain. Water thundering a few feet away, rock glistening with moisture, ferns growing in the spray zone where conditions remain perpetually damp. The basalt formed 15 million years ago from multiple lava flows, each flow creating a distinct layer visible in cliff faces. Softer layers erode faster than harder ones, creating the overhangs that allow trails behind falls. The waterfalls themselves forming where hard caprock overlies softer material that water removes more easily. The park preserves old-growth forest between falls, Douglas fir and western red cedar, bigleaf maple draped with moss, sword ferns carpeting the forest floor. The trail connecting the falls creates a loop through this landscape. Visitors moving from falls to falls, like pilgrims visiting a series of shrines, each waterfall slightly different in character, some wide and spreading, others narrow and concentrated, some falling free through air, others sliding down angled rock faces. The falls flow strongest during winter and spring when rainfall keeps creeks full, diminishing but never disappearing during summer months when springs and groundwater maintain flows sufficient to keep the amphitheaters wet and green and alive with falling water. Malheur National Wildlife Refuge encompasses 187,000 acres of wetlands and uplands in the Harney Basin, a closed basin where water enters but doesn't leave except through evaporation. Rivers flow into the basin from surrounding mountains, pooling in shallow lakes and spreading across marshes where cattails and bulrushes grow dense, providing habitat for waterfowl, wading birds, shorebirds, and dozens of other species dependent on wetlands in a region dominated by sagebrush and desert. The refuge exists because a few forward-thinking individuals in the early 1900s recognized that market hunting was decimating bird populations and that western wetlands were being drained at alarming rates. Malheur became a refuge when such protections were still novel, controversial, opposed by those who saw economic value in draining marshes for agriculture. The basin's water levels fluctuate dramatically between wet and dry cycles. Some years the marshes expand across thousands of additional acres. Other years they contract to their core areas, exposing mudflats where shorebirds probe for invertebrates. These fluctuations are natural, part of the basin's character, but water management for agriculture has altered patterns, reducing peak highs and extending low periods, changes that affect species dependent on specific water depths and timing. Still, the refuge provides essential habitat in a landscape largely transformed by human use, an island of something approaching original conditions, though original becomes complicated when you recognize that this landscape has always changed, that transformation is constant, that permanence is an illusion we impose on processes that proceed with or without our participation. Mount Jefferson rises to 10,497 feet, with 5 glaciers clinging to its flanks, ice that advances and retreats over decades and centuries in response to snowfall and summer temperatures. Jefferson Park. Glacier on the mountain's north side has retreated over 1,000 feet in the past century, exposing moraines, ridges of rock and debris pushed into place by the glacier when it extended further. These moraines show as parallel ridges below the current glacier terminus, each ridge marking a position where the glacier stabilized long enough to build a significant debris pile before retreating further. Fresh vegetation colonizes the newly exposed terrain, lichens first, then mosses, eventually small plants as soil develops grain by grain from weathered rock and accumulated organic matter. The glacier's retreat reveals a timeline of climate, each foot of ice lost representing some quantity of warmth gained, solar radiation absorbed, snow that fell as rain instead. Mount Jefferson itself displays volcanic origins clearly, a stratovolcano built through repeated eruptions, layers of lava and ash stacked over hundreds of thousands of years. The mountain hasn't erupted in recorded history, but remains potentially active, part of the Cascade volcanic arc, where subduction of oceanic crust beneath continental plate generates magma that rises through weak points in the overlying rock. The mountain's sharp profile, its glaciers, its position in the chain of Cascade peaks, all mark it as fundamentally similar to its neighbors, cut from the same geological cloth, built by the same forces, shaped by ice and erosion into its current form. Thor's Well appears on the coast near Cape Perpetua as a seemingly bottomless hole that drains ocean water during certain tidal conditions, though it's actually bowl-shaped rather than truly deep, perhaps 20 feet to the bottom. The feature formed when wave action carved through a sea cave's roof, creating an opening that fills and drains with each surge, water rushing in, swirling, then draining back as the next wave arrives. During high tides, and especially during storm conditions, waves fill the well with such force that water fountains upward through the hole, creating dramatic spray that rises 10 or 15 feet before falling back. The timing matters greatly. At low tide, the well becomes just an interesting hole in rock. At high tide with waves, it transforms into something that seems alive, breathing water in and out, the ocean's pulse made visible through this particular configuration of stone. The basalt here came from lava flows that reached the ocean millions of years ago, cooling into hexagonal columns visible along Cape Perpetua's cliffs. These columns form when lava cools slowly and evenly, contraction creating geometric patterns that persist in the rock, columns that erosion eventually separates and topples, contributing to the rocky debris that litters the shoreline, material that waves gradually reduce to sand and eventually to nothing, carrying it back to the ocean floor where sedimentary processes will eventually create new rock, completing cycles that operate over millions of years, timescales that render human observation nearly meaningless except as the briefest glimpse of processes that preceded us and will continue after. The Rogue River earns its name honestly, carving through 215 miles from Crater Lake's slopes to the Pacific, with a character that varies from gentle to violent depending on location and season. The river drops 6,700 feet total, much of that occurring in the wild and scenic section, where rapids range from challenging Class 3 to dangerous Class 5. Water, compressed through narrow gorges, forced over and around boulders, creating hydraulics capable of flipping rafts and holding swimmers underwater through sheer turbulent force. The canyon through which the Rogue flows isolates itself from roads in places, accessible only by river or trail, this inaccessibility preserving character that more accessible rivers have lost to development. Salmon and steelhead still run the Rogue in numbers significant enough to support sport and commercial fishing, fish that migrate from ocean to spawning grounds, swimming upstream through rapids that would exhaust human swimmers, driven by instinct and biology to return to birthplaces they left years before. The river's name might derive from French rogue or might simply describe its character. Accounts differ. Either way, the name fits a river that refuses predictability, that floods violently some winters and runs low other summers, that carves and shapes its canyon in ongoing conversation between water and stone, neither yielding, neither victorious, the relationship continuing as long as rain falls and gravity pulls water toward the ocean. Tumalo Falls drops 97 feet over a basalt cliff formed from lava flows that originated near the Three Sisters, water flowing year-round from snowmelt and springs that feed the upper Tumalo Creek watershed. The falls sit at the transition between dry ponderosa pine forest below and wetter mountain forest above, marking an ecological boundary where precipitation patterns shift with elevation. In spring, snowmelt swells the creek into a thundering curtain that sends spray across the viewing area, mist catching light in afternoon sun to create rainbows that appear and vanish as clouds pass overhead. By late summer, the flow diminishes to a fraction of spring volume, but the falls never run dry, springs maintaining sufficient flow to keep water moving over the cliff, even during drought years. The basalt itself shows columnar jointing, vertical cracks that formed as the lava cooled, creating pillars that erosion eventually separates, fragments that pile at the fall's base, where they're slowly ground to sand by the abrasive action of water carrying smaller stones. The trail to the falls climbs through forest where evidence of past fires shows in blackened snags and new growth, ponderosa pines with bark thick enough to survive moderate fire, an adaptation to an environment where lightning strikes and human activity make fire not an aberration, but a regular occurrence, something the forest evolved to accommodate rather than resist. The Fossil Lake area near Christmas Valley preserves 13,000-year-old remains from a time when a pluvial lake, a lake that forms during wet climatic periods, covered 50 miles of what is now high desert. The lake formed during the Pleistocene when the Pacific Northwest received more precipitation and experienced cooler temperatures that reduced evaporation, allowing basins like this to fill and persist. The lake attracted birds in extraordinary numbers. Over 80 species fossils have been identified from sediments, including flamingos, grebes, and pelicans, species that require extensive shallow water habitat. Mammal remains include camels, horses, bison, and ground sloths, an assemblage that seems incongruous in today's sagebrush desert, but made sense in the grasslands that surrounded the ancient lake. As the climate warmed after the Ice Age's end, the lake shrank and eventually disappeared, leaving behind dried sediments that preserve the bones and sometimes even feather impressions from creatures that lived and died here when Oregon's geography and climate differed fundamentally from present conditions. The fossils emerge gradually through erosion, wind, and occasional rain exposing bones that lay buried for millennia, each discovery adding detail to our understanding of ecosystems that vanished so completely that without these physical traces, we'd have no way to know they ever existed. These bones being the only evidence of abundance and diversity, now replaced by desert and emptiness. Wizard Island rises from Crater Lake's surface as a nearly perfect cinder cone, 763 feet above water level, formed after the caldera's creation when new volcanic activity built this feature within the larger crater. The island's summit contains a crater 90 feet deep that occasionally holds a small pond, a crater within a crater within a caldera, nested depressions that speak to volcanic processes occurring at different scales and times. The cinder cone formed from lava fountaining, molten rock ejected into air, where it partially solidified before falling back, fragments piling around the vent, building the cone from the inside out over what might have been weeks or months of eruptive activity. Wizard Island represents the caldera's continued geological activity after the catastrophic collapse, proof that Crater Lake sits atop a volcanic system that isn't finished, merely resting. Boats carry visitors to the island during summer months, trails climbing to the summit crater where you stand 700 feet above one of America's deepest lakes, looking down into a volcanic crater while surrounded by water that fills a much larger crater, perspective shifting between scales, between the small cone you're standing on and the massive caldera that contains it. The island's name comes from its resemblance to a wizard's hat when viewed from certain angles, imagination finding familiar shapes in volcanic accident, humans unable to resist pattern making even in geology's abstract sculptures. The Strawberry Mountain Wilderness in the Blue Mountains preserves alpine meadows above 9,000 feet, where seasonal wildflower displays include over 300 plant species adapted to short growing seasons and winter snows that exceed 15 feet depth. Mountains themselves are ancient compared to the Cascades, their peaks worn by erosion into gentler profiles. though steep enough in places to support small glaciers and permanent snowfields. The wilderness takes its name from Strawberry Mountain itself, where wild strawberries supposedly grew in abundance, though some suggest the name derives from Native American terms, mistranslated or misunderstood by English speakers. The high meadows bloom in progression as snow retreats through late spring and early summer. First, the low areas melt out, flowers blooming there while snow still covers higher elevations. Then mid-elevation meadows bloom. Finally, in late July or early August, the highest meadows thaw and explode with color, compressed into brief weeks before frost returns. These plants evolved strategies for rapid growth. Bulbs and corms that store energy underground, allowing quick sprouting when conditions permit. Perennials that maintain root systems through winter, ready to photosynthesize immediately when snow melts. Annuals that complete their entire life cycle in weeks rather than months. The meadows demonstrate life's adaptability, organisms finding ways to thrive in conditions that seem prohibitively harsh, turning constraints into niches that specialists can exploit while generalists struggle. Mackenzie Pass crosses the Cascade Crest at 5,325 feet elevation through lava flows from Belknap Crater and Yapoa Crater, black basalt covering 90 square miles in rough, broken surfaces that remain largely unvegetated 1,500 years after eruption. The lava fields appear almost lunar, certainly hostile to comfortable walking, surfaces sharp enough to shred boots and clothing, footing uncertain on loose chunks and hidden voids. The highway through this landscape required special engineering, asphalt laid directly on lava in many places, the road following paths of least resistance through what nature made deliberately resistant. The lava came from fissures rather than central vents, molten rock pouring from long cracks in the Earth's surface, flowing downhill under gravity, spreading and cooling into the rough formations visible today. Some flows contain lava tubes where the surface crusted over while liquid continued flowing beneath, leaving hollow tunnels after the lava drained. Vegetation slowly colonizes the flows, lichens first, breaking down rock surface into particles that might eventually become soil. Then mosses wherever tiny pockets of moisture and organic matter accumulate. Eventually, small plants in protected crevices. The process requires centuries, and even after 1,500 years, the flows remain predominantly bare, black rock dominating the landscape, testament to how slowly ecosystems develop on such unforgiving substrate. How patient life must be when conditions offer so little immediate hospitality. The Willamette River flows northward, unusual for West Coast rivers which typically run east-west or west, draining nearly 12,000 square miles before joining the Columbia just 100 miles from the Pacific. The river's course reflects the valley's geological structure, a structural trough between mountain ranges, water naturally flowing along this low ground rather than cutting across it. The Willamette meanders extensively through its valley, oxbow lakes and abandoned channels marking former courses the river followed before cutting new paths during floods. These meanders lengthen the river considerably. Measuring centerline distance understates the actual distance water travels through all the curves and loops. The valley's soil fertility comes largely from Missoula flood deposits, but the river itself contributes through annual flooding that historically spread nutrient-rich sediment across floodplains, replenishing agricultural lands naturally. Dams and levees now control these floods, protecting development, but also cutting off the sediment supply that maintained soil fertility. A trade-off that seemed reasonable when made, but whose consequences complicate assumptions about river management. The Willamette supported vast salmon runs historically, fish migrating up tributary streams to spawn in headwaters throughout the drainage. Those runs diminished dramatically through the 20th century, but persist. Salmon still returning, though in numbers that prompt concern rather than confidence. Their presence a reminder of what was and what might still be if conditions changed to favor them again. Broken Top Mountain displays severe glacial erosion on its eastern face, the formerly symmetrical volcanic cone carved into a jagged amphitheater by ice that exposed the mountain's internal structure. Alternating layers of lava and ash revealed like a dissected specimen, the volcano's anatomy made visible through erosion's patient excavation. The mountain reached perhaps 11,000 feet before glaciation. Now its highest point barely exceeds 9,000, the difference removed by ice that ground away over thousands of years of glacial advance and retreat. The eroded cirque shows distinct color bands, red oxidized layers alternating with black basalt, white ash layers interspersed, each representing separate eruptions separated by dormant periods. The eastern face drops away in cliffs and couloirs where snow accumulates and avalanches regularly, conditions too unstable for much vegetation, rock and ice dominating. The western side retains more intact profile, glacial erosion having worked primarily from the east where ice accumulated deeper and persisted longer. Broken Top illustrates how external forces modify volcanic landforms, how the same mountain-building processes that construct peaks are immediately opposed by erosion, gravity, weathering. The contest never balanced evenly, but ongoing always, mountains rising and wearing away simultaneously. The landscape, at any given moment representing a snapshot of processes that operate across millions of years, appearance suggesting permanence that closer examination reveals as temporary. The Jordan Crater's volcanic field in southeastern Oregon covers 29 square miles with lava flows erupted just 3,200 years ago, geologically yesterday. Recent enough that human ancestors might have witnessed the eruptions and passed down accounts that degraded into legend. Some flows contain lava tunnels formed where surface crust insulated liquid lava that continued flowing beneath, draining to leave void spaces. The tunnels occasionally collapse, creating skylights that open to the surface, revealing the hollow interiors where you can see flow marks on walls, places where lava dripped from ceilings before cooling. Pressure ridges mark the flow's surfaces where moving lava buckled and folded, creating linear mounds and depressions that record the direction and dynamics of flow. The craters themselves, cinder cones and vents, rise modestly, perhaps 50 to 100 feet, but dominate the flat lava plains around them. The field sees few visitors. Access requires driving unmarked dirt roads through Bureau of Land Management property. No services for 50 miles in any direction. Remoteness that preserves the features in nearly pristine condition. The lava remains sharp, vegetation sparse, the landscape appearing caught between eruption and equilibrium, arrested in transition, neither fresh enough to still be warm, nor old enough to have softened into something accommodating to life. Akola State Park's headlands rise 400 feet above the Pacific, composed of 15-million-year-old submarine basalt that erupted underwater before tectonic uplift raised it above sea level. The rock shows pillow structures, rounded forms created when lava erupts into water, the outer surface cooling instantly into a glassy rind, while the interior remains molten, creating bulbous shapes that pile atop each other. These pillows indicate that when this rock formed, it lay beneath ocean, subsequent collision between tectonic plates thrusting it upward into air. Processes that operate so slowly that human lifespans offer no perspective. Our entire recorded history occupying a tiny fraction of the time required to raise seafloor hundreds of feet above current sea level. The headlands offer views northward toward Tillamook Head and southward to Cannon Beach. Haystack Rock visible in the distance, coastline stretching in both directions as far as clarity permits. Sea stacks dot the nearshore waters, isolated rocks that represent more resistant portions of headlands, the land bridge between them and shore having eroded away, leaving these monuments to stone's variable durability. Winter storms send waves crashing against the cliffs, with force you feel through your feet, vibration traveling through solid rock, the headlands slowly yielding to wave action, retreating inland at rates measured in inches per century, perhaps, but retreating nonetheless. The ocean patient and persistent, working constantly, never sleeping, never pausing in its assault on the edge of continents. The Crooked River cuts a 300-foot deep canyon through central Oregon's high desert, flowing 125 miles through volcanic plateaus, creating Smith Rock's dramatic gorge through gradual downcutting over millions of years. The river's name describes its character accurately. It meanders and loops, curves back on itself, takes circuitous paths around resistant rock formations, rather than cutting straight courses. This wandering reflects the relatively soft rock the river cuts through in places, easily eroded material that allows the river to shift course over time, and harder formations that force it to detour. The canyon itself varies in width from hundreds of feet, where the river cut through softer sediments, to just dozens of feet, where harder basalt forced the river into narrow slots. In places, the canyon walls rise sheer from water's edge, no room for roads or trails, accessible only by boat or by hiking down from the rim. The river supports populations of native fish adapted to its particular conditions. Redband trout and other species evolved specifically to this drainage, fish that differ genetically from populations in other river systems despite superficial similarities. The Crooked River changes dramatically with seasons. Spring runoff from mountain snowpack can increase flows tenfold compared to late summer, when springs and groundwater maintain only minimal flows, the river existing in multiple states depending on when you encounter it, identity fluid rather than fixed. Clear Lake in the Mackenzie River system maintains 34-degree water temperature year-round, its floor preserving a 3,000-year-old forest submerged when lava flows dammed the valley. The trees stand upright 100 feet beneath the surface, their trunks and branches visible from boats on calm days, a drowned forest frozen in time by water too cold for decay organisms to function effectively. The lake's constant temperature comes from springs feeding it from underground sources, where water has been insulated from seasonal temperature variations, emerging at the temperature of deep rock rather than ambient air. The clarity allows visibility to significant depths. On sunny days, you can see the submerged trees clearly, their wood still solid after 3 millennia underwater, bark sometimes still attached, branches reaching upward toward light they'll never touch again. The lake supports few fish because the cold water limits biological productivity, growth rates slow, populations small. The springs that feed the lake emerge at the upstream end, water literally boiling up from below in turbulent fountains that maintain flow even during driest years. The lake drains into Clear Lake Creek, which quickly drops temperature toward ambient, warming enough within a mile to support more typical aquatic communities. But the lake itself remains cold and clear and still, time slowed by temperature, change arrested by conditions that preserve rather than transform. The Cascade Siskiyou National Monument protects 114,000 acres, where 3 distinct biogeographic provinces converge: the Cascade Range, Siskiyou Mountains, and Great Basin, meeting in a relatively compact area. that hosts extraordinary biological diversity as a result. Species from each province overlap here, creating assemblages found nowhere else. Plants and animals from different evolutionary lineages encountering each other in this zone where mountains and desert interpenetrate. Over 200 bird species have been documented, including migrants from 3 different flyways using the area during seasonal movements. The geology varies as complexly as the biology. Volcanic rocks from Cascade activity, metamorphic formations from Siskiyou mountain building, sedimentary rocks from ancient seas. This geodiversity creates topographic complexity, canyons and ridges, meadows and forests, wetlands and cliffs, habitat variety that supports species variety. The monument designation proved controversial, conflicts between conservation and resource extraction playing out in courts and Congress. Debates over whether biological diversity constitutes sufficient justification for limiting logging, grazing, and other uses. These debates continue though the monument persists. Landscape valuable enough to different interests that compromise satisfies no one completely. The land itself indifferent to human arguments about its proper use, continuing to host its remarkable diversity, regardless of which political philosophy prevails temporarily in Washington. Paulina Lake and East Lake occupy separate calderas within Newberry Volcano's larger crater, the 2 lakes separated by a 500-foot-high volcanic cone called the Central Pumice Cone, formed during eruptions 7,000 years ago. The lakes differ chemically and ecologically despite their proximity. Paulina slightly warmer and more alkaline, East Lake colder and deeper. Hot springs feed both lakes in places, underwater vents releasing heated water that creates thermal gradients, pockets of warmth in otherwise cold waters. These springs support bacterial communities that thrive in heat, organisms more closely related to ancient lineages than to typical lake bacteria, heat-adapted life that finds the volcanic environment hospitable rather than hostile. The lakes support introduced trout populations that have become self-sustaining, fish spawning in tributaries during spring, providing sport fishing that attracts visitors who might otherwise ignore Newberry's geological features. The caldera rim rises hundreds of feet above the lakes, forested slopes dropping to water's edge, creating scenic quality that combines mountain lake aesthetics with volcanic drama. The area shows ongoing geological activity, hot springs indicating that magma still exists at relatively shallow depths, heat gradually working its way to surface. The volcano dormant, but not extinct, merely resting between eruptive episodes that occur over timescales humans perceive as permanent, but geology recognizes as temporary. The Illinois River carves through southwestern Oregon's Siskiyou Mountains in a canyon 2,000 feet deep, cutting through serpentine rock formations whose unique mineral composition supports endemic plant species found nowhere else on Earth. Serpentine forms when oceanic crust undergoes metamorphism, its chemistry, high in magnesium, low in calcium, containing toxic levels of heavy metals, making it inhospitable to most plants. But some species evolved tolerance, adaptations that allow them to grow in soils that poison others, creating communities dominated by specialists. Port Orford cedar grows here naturally, a tree prized for its rot-resistant wood, harvested nearly to extinction before protections limited cutting. The Illinois flows through this landscape as a wild and scenic river, protected from dams, remaining in essentially natural condition, supporting salmon runs that persist despite challenges faced elsewhere. The canyon isolates itself from easy access, trails and river the only ways to experience its interior. This difficulty protecting the area while also limiting appreciation to those willing to work for it. The Siskiyous represent some of Oregon's oldest mountains, their complex geology and varied topography creating conditions that supported species through ice ages when other regions became too cold, serving as refugia where lineages persisted, then spreading outward when conditions moderated, making the Siskiyous disproportionately important to regional biodiversity, their complexity and isolation having preserved what uniformity and accessibility would have eliminated. Sparks Lake near Bend varies in size seasonally, its shallow waters rarely exceeding 10 feet depth, surrounded by lava flows that create natural dams preventing drainage. The lake has no outlet, water leaving only through evaporation and underground seepage, making its level dependent entirely on input from snowmelt and springs versus losses to air and subsurface. In wet years, the lake expands across hundreds of acres. In dry years, it contracts to marshland with scattered ponds, its character changing fundamentally with precipitation patterns. The name comes from an early homesteader, though some suggest it should describe the way sunlight reflects off the water's surface, creating sparkles visible from surrounding ridges. The lake sits at elevation, where lodgepole pine forest gives way to more open terrain, trees scattered rather than continuous, meadows interspersed with forest, creating park-like quality that painters and photographers favor for its aesthetic balance. Mount Bachelor and Broken Top provide backdrop depending on viewing angle. Snow-covered peaks reflected in still water during calm conditions. Reflections so perfect they create difficulty determining which direction is up in photographs. The lake supports no fish, its seasonal drying making permanent populations impossible, though amphibians manage by completing their life cycles during wet periods, surviving dry years as dormant eggs, or by migrating to more reliable waters nearby. The Wallowa Lake moraine rises 300 feet at the lake's northern end, pushed into place by glaciers that retreated 12,000 years ago, a dam of gravel and boulders that impounds Oregon's deepest glacially carved lake at 283 feet. The moraine marks the glacier's maximum extent, the point where ice delivered more sediment than melting removed, building the pile higher over centuries until the glacier retreated and left this ridge behind. Walking on the moraine, you're walking on material that ice transported from mountains miles away, rock plucked from cliffs and valleys upstream, carried within and beneath the glacier, deposited finally when ice could carry it no further. The lake itself fills a valley carved by ice, deepened and widened through glacial erosion, U-shaped rather than V-shaped like stream-cut valleys, the profile characteristic of glacial action. The Wallowas still contain small glaciers at high elevations, remnants of the ice that once filled these valleys, survivors of warming that melted their parent ice mass, persisting in shaded cirques where snow accumulation still exceeds summer melting, at least for now, though their future remains uncertain as climate continues changing. The moraine prevents the lake from draining entirely, making it permanent rather than seasonal, creating habitat that persists year-round, supporting fish populations and aquatic communities that temporary waters couldn't sustain, the moraine thus serving as foundation for ecosystem that depends on its presence. Tillamook Head rises 1,200 feet above sea level on the northern coast, its summit accessible via trails where Lewis and Clark observed gray whales during their 1806 expedition to view a beached specimen. The explorers were seeking whale blubber, hoping to obtain oil and meat from a creature that had washed ashore south of the head, their journals describing the effort required to reach the coast from Fort Clatsop and the view from Tillamook Head's heights. The headland consists of volcanic basalt, part of the same formations visible throughout the northern coast, rock that resisted erosion, while softer material around it washed away. The forest covering the head includes massive Sitka spruce shaped by constant wind, trees growing flags where windward side branches die from salt spray and desiccation, while leeward branches survive, creating one-sided profiles that map prevailing winds. The trail climbs through forest so thick that views remain limited until reaching the summit, then suddenly opening to panoramas of ocean, coastline, offshore rocks, waves breaking in lines that extend to horizon. On clear days, you can see mountains to the east, valleys to the south, headlands marching northward into Washington, perspective that encompasses the meeting of continent and ocean, the collision between tectonic plates that built these mountains, the erosion that cuts them back, all the forces that shape coastlines visible in single views that reward the climb's effort. The Sutton Mountain area near Mitchell exposes 50 million years of geological history in colorful clay formations where fossils of early horses, camels, and oreodonts reveal Oregon's subtropical past. These creatures inhabited landscapes nothing like today's high desert, forests and grasslands in warm, humid conditions when Oregon sat at latitudes more southern than present, before tectonic drift pushed the continent northward and climate shifted toward cooler, drier patterns. The oreodonts, extinct now for millions of years, resembled sheep-sized pigs but weren't closely related to any modern animal, their lineage gone entirely from Earth's current fauna. Early horses no larger than dogs grazed here, species that would eventually evolve into modern horses while their ancestral forms vanished. The fossilized remains emerge from clay layers painted in pastels, pinks and tans, greens and grays, colors indicating different mineral compositions in the original ash falls that buried these ancient ecosystems. Volcanic eruptions from distant vents deposited ash that settled in lakes and floodplains, preserving organisms caught in the falls, creating fossil beds that now erode gradually as wind and rare rains remove protective layers. The area remains remote, accessible by rough roads through land managed primarily for cattle grazing, the fossils legally protected but practically vulnerable, their preservation depending partly on obscurity, on the fact that few people know where to look or take the effort to reach these badlands where Oregon's deep history lies exposed. Crater Lake's deepest point plunges 1,943 feet, 594 meters, where scientists have documented unique bacteria adapted to extreme darkness and near freezing temperatures at depth. These organisms represent extremophiles, life pushed to edges of what biology permits, thriving or at least surviving in conditions that would kill most species. The bacteria have evolved strategies for extracting energy from chemical processes rather than relying on photosynthesis or consuming photosynthetic organisms, making them independent of sunlight in ways most life is not. Research into these deep water communities continues, scientists using submersibles and remote sensors to explore the lake's bottom, where pressures and darkness create environments more alien than most terrestrial locations. The depth itself results from the caldera's formation. When Mount Mazama collapsed, it created a depression that subsequent water accumulation filled without approaching the rim, leaving hundreds of feet of depth between water surface and caldera floor. This depth contributes to the lake's remarkable clarity and color. Suspended particles settle out over time, sinking beyond the zone where wave action and thermal currents disturb them, leaving upper waters remarkably free of sediment. The depth also means the lake stores enormous volumes of cold water, thermal mass that moderates temperature swings, preventing freezing even during harsh winters when surrounding areas experience extreme cold. Three-Fingered Jack Mountain displays prominent vertical dikes, walls of harder volcanic rock that resist erosion, while softer surrounding material weathers away, creating the mountain's distinctive sawtooth ridges at 7,841 feet elevation. The dikes formed when magma intruded into cracks in existing rock, cooling there in thin vertical sheets that proved more resistant than the volcanic cone they cut through. As glaciers and weathering removed softer material, these dikes remained standing as fins and towers, linear features that give the mountain its jagged profile and its name, the fingers being prominent towers on the summit ridge. Climbers prize three-fingered jack for routes that follow these dikes, climbing the walls between the fingers, vertical or near vertical rock that requires technical skill. The mountain has been heavily glaciated, though the glaciers themselves have largely disappeared, leaving behind cirques and moraines that record Ice Age climates when glaciers covered much of the Cascades. The mountain's asymmetry, one side displaying the dramatic dikes, the other more rounded, reflects different erosion rates and exposure to weathering. The contrast visible from nearby highways, where the mountain presents different profiles depending on viewing angle. Three-fingered jack demonstrates how erosion reveals internal structure, how removal of material exposes architecture that was hidden when the mountain was intact. Geology's tendency to create sculpture through subtraction, forms emerging from what remains after softer material departs. The Donner und Blitzen River flows through southeastern Oregon's Harney Basin. Its name derived from an 1864 military expedition caught in a violent thunderstorm, German for thunder and lightning. The river flows 90 miles from its headwaters in the Steens Mountain to the Malheur Basin, where it historically flooded into shallow lakes before evaporating, water never reaching the ocean, but rather returning to atmosphere, completing cycles measured in months rather than the years required for rivers that flow to sea. The watershed demonstrates desert hydrology, water precious and seasonal, flows varying dramatically between spring snowmelt and late summer, when only springs maintain any flow at all. The Donner und Blitzen carved a canyon through Steens Mountain's western slope, a valley called the Blitzen Valley, where riparian vegetation creates green corridors through otherwise dry landscape, cottonwoods and willows marking the water's presence, even when the stream itself runs underground in places, flowing through porous substrate before re-emerging downstream. Native peoples used this valley for millennia, archaeological sites documenting thousands of years of seasonal presence, groups following water and game, harvesting plants when they ripened, moving with the seasons in patterns that made sense in this landscape, where resources occurred in patches separated by areas offering little. The river's flows have been altered by irrigation withdrawals, dams that store water for later use, changes that reduce the flooding that historically spread across the basin floor, alterations that affected wetland ecosystems dependent on seasonal inundation. Munson Creek Falls drops 319 feet through a narrow gorge in the Coast Range, fed by a watershed receiving over 100 inches of annual rainfall that maintains flow even during late summer months when most coastal waterfalls diminish. The falls operate more constantly than many others, this reliability coming from the Coast Range's ability to capture moisture from Pacific storms, precipitation that soaks into deep forest soils before gradually releasing to streams, underground flows maintaining surface creeks even weeks after the last rain. The gorge itself cuts through basalt, the narrow confines amplifying the fall's sound, creating acoustic effects where water's roar echoes from stone walls. Moss covers every surface not actively scoured by falling water, green coating that adds surreal quality to the scene, forest extending into the gorge where light and moisture permit, vegetation advancing to edges of physical possibility before yielding to conditions even coastal rainforest species cannot tolerate. The trail to the falls passes through forest cathedral-like in its dimensions and atmosphere, towering trees, filtered light, hushed quality interrupted only by creek sounds and occasional bird calls. The falls themselves appear gradually as you approach, sound arriving before sight, anticipation building as the trail follows the creek upstream, the falls finally revealing themselves as the trail rounds a final bend, water dropping in a single long plunge that varies from narrow stream in summer to wide curtain during winter's peak flows. The Big Obsidian Flow at Newberry Volcano covers 1 square mile with volcanic glass erupted 1,300 years ago, its surface sharp and largely unvegetated, reaching 150 feet thick in places where lava accumulated before cooling. Obsidian forms when silica-rich lava cools too quickly for crystals to develop, creating natural glass that fractures conchoidally, in curved patterns like broken glass, into edges sharp as surgical blades. Native peoples prized obsidian for tools and weapons, the Newberry flows providing material that was traded across western North America. Obsidian from these flows identified in archaeological sites hundreds of miles distant, evidence of trade networks that moved materials and presumably ideas across distances that would have required weeks of travel. The flow's surface displays features frozen mid-formation, pressure ridges where moving lava buckled, flow lines showing direction of movement, scattered pumice from explosions that occurred during eruption. The black surface absorbs solar radiation, becoming hot enough on summer days that touching it bare-handed risks burns, the glass retaining heat well into evening. Vegetation colonizes the flow slowly, lichens managing to gain purchase on the glass surface, their biological acids beginning the slow work of breaking down rock into something approaching soil, the first step in succession that will eventually, over centuries or millennia, transform this barren flow into something capable of supporting trees and complex ecosystems, though that transformation has barely begun. The Columbia River Basalt Group underlies much of eastern Oregon with layers up to 10,000 feet thick, erupted from fissures 17 to 6 million years ago, in floods of lava that covered 81,000 square miles. These weren't typical eruptions from central vents, but rather fissure eruptions where cracks in the Earth's surface opened and lava poured forth in volumes difficult to imagine. Individual flows extending over hundreds of miles, filling valleys and covering existing topography to depths of hundreds of feet in single eruptive episodes. The basalt layers visible in canyon walls throughout eastern Oregon represent individual flows, each flow recorded as a distinct layer, the stack showing dozens or hundreds of separate eruptions separated by dormant periods long enough for soil to develop, only to be buried by subsequent flows. The volume of lava these eruptions produced staggers comprehension. Thousands of cubic miles of molten rock reaching the surface, so much material that scientists debate what processes could generate such extraordinary volumes. The eruptions likely affected global climate, ash and sulfur dioxide injected into the atmosphere reducing solar radiation, reaching Earth's surface, causing temperature drops that might have influenced evolution and extinction patterns. The basalt itself varies in character. Some flows created columnar jointing as they cooled. Others showed different fracture patterns, variations reflecting cooling rates and lava chemistry. The differences visible in cliff faces where erosion exposes internal structure. Tokati Falls drops 113 feet in 2 distinct tiers through a narrow slot canyon, water flowing over columnar basalt formations that cooled into geometric pillars during ancient volcanic eruptions. The columns formed when lava cooled slowly and evenly, contraction creating hexagonal patterns like honeycomb, pillars sometimes so regular they appear artificial, geometry emerging from physical forces that operate the same. Everywhere lava cools under similar conditions. The fall's name comes from a Chinook word meaning graceful, appropriate for water that drops in two stages. The upper falls feeding a pool that immediately spills over the lower falls, water constantly moving yet contained by stone that resists its erosive force through sheer hardness. The slot canyon concentrates the fall's force, water compressed into narrow space, sound amplified by enclosing walls, spray creating microclimates where moisture-loving plants thrive. The trail to the falls crosses the North Umpqua River on a footbridge, then climbs to a viewing platform positioned for optimal perspective, the platform necessary because the slot canyon's walls prevent approach to the fall's base. The view from the platform captures both tiers, the columns, the pools, the complete scene composed as if deliberately arranged for aesthetic effect. Though of course the arrangement emerged from geological processes, indifferent to beauty, forces that created form through physics rather than aesthetics, the beauty arising as side effect of natural law. Summer Lake in Lake County covers 20,000 acres seasonally as a shallow alkali lake, evaporating to mud flats during drought years where salt crusts accumulate in patterns visible from space. The lake occupies a basin with no outlet, water arriving via precipitation and runoff, but leaving only through evaporation, causing dissolved minerals to concentrate, creating alkaline conditions hostile to most aquatic life but hospitable to certain specialists. Brine shrimp, alkali flies, microorganisms adapted to salinity levels that would kill freshwater species. Birds gather in remarkable numbers during migrations, waterfowl and shorebirds feeding on the lake's abundant invertebrates, using Summer Lake as a refueling stop on longer journeys. The lake demonstrates desert basin hydrology, shallow, variable, mineral-rich, its existence dependent on balance between input and evaporation, a balance that shifts with climate patterns, causing the lake to expand during wet periods and contract during droughts. Archaeological evidence suggests the basin held much deeper water during the Pleistocene, a pluvial lake that shrank as climate warmed and dried, leaving Summer Lake as remnant of a much larger feature. The mud flats exposed during low water show geometric cracking patterns as clay dries and contracts, polygons ranging from inches to feet across, patterns that form reliably whenever clay-rich sediment dries, mathematical regularity emerging from the material's properties. Geometry, written in mud. Lost Lake sits at 3,140 feet elevation near Mount Hood, with the mountain's reflection creating one of Oregon's most photographed scenes. The lake fed by snowmelt and springs, maintaining clarity despite having no visible outlet. The water drains through porous lava tubes beneath the lake bed, percolating underground before re-emerging in springs downstream, the lake functioning as surface expression of groundwater flow patterns, water temporarily visible before disappearing again into subsurface passages. During most years, the lake maintains stable levels, input balancing underground drainage, but occasionally, during particularly dry years, the lake drains significantly, exposing lava tubes that normally remain submerged, allowing visitors to peer into the holes through which water exits, openings that swallow streams during high water but stand empty and accessible during droughts. The phenomenon draws attention partly for its dramatic quality, a lake that drains like a bathtub, but also for what it reveals about volcanic landscapes, how water moves through them in 3 dimensions rather than just across surfaces, how the same porosity that allows rapid infiltration creates underground flow networks invisible from above. The lake's name might derive from this occasional disappearance. Though other lost lakes exist throughout Oregon, the name common enough to suggest that lakes draining through subsurface passages occur frequently in volcanic terrain, though few demonstrate the process as dramatically as this one. The Steens Mountain Loop Road climbs 5,000 feet in just 20 miles, crossing through 4 distinct life zones from desert sagebrush through juniper woodland and aspen groves to finally reach alpine tundra. The climb compresses ecological transitions that typically require traveling hundreds of miles north-south into vertical distance traversable in an hour of driving, each zone supporting characteristic plant and animal communities adapted to the specific conditions at that elevation. The sagebrush zone receives perhaps 10 inches of annual precipitation, supports drought-adapted species with deep roots and conservative water use. Higher juniper woodlands receive slightly more moisture, enough for scattered trees though still far from forest. Aspen groves occupy moist sites at mid-elevation, their white bark distinctive against darker conifers, leaves turning gold in autumn before dropping. Finally, above roughly 8,000 feet, trees cannot survive, the growing season too short and conditions too harsh, leaving only low-growing plants adapted to alpine conditions. Short stems, deep roots, rapid growth compressed into brief summer weeks. Driving this road, you experience climate zones that exist thousands of miles apart at sea level, elevation substituting for latitude, the mountain creating its own climate pattern independent of surrounding desert, wringing moisture from air masses that cross its heights, creating conditions that permit life forms otherwise excluded from this region by aridity and heat. Samuel H. Boardman. State Scenic Corridor stretches 12 miles along the southern coast with over a dozen viewpoints overlooking sea stacks, natural bridges, and headlands where coastal erosion creates new formations constantly. The corridor protects some of Oregon's most dramatic coastal scenery: cliffs dropping hundreds of feet to breaking waves, offshore rocks that represent remnants of former headlands, arches where wave action carved through resistant formations. The geology here consists primarily of ancient submarine volcanic rocks, sediments that accumulated on the ocean floor before tectonic collision thrust them above sea level, creating land from what was once seafloor, processes that continue as subduction slowly adds material to the continent's edge even while erosion removes it from the coast. The viewpoints bear names like Natural Bridges, Arch Rock, Thunder Rock, descriptive titles that capture the feature's defining characteristics. Each viewpoint offers different perspective on the fundamental process: waves attacking stone, stone yielding gradually, shapes emerging from this contest between water and rock. Winter storms demonstrate the ocean's power most dramatically, waves reaching 50 or 70 feet, wind-driven swells crashing against cliffs with force that shakes the ground, spray rising hundreds of feet into air, the ocean's violence on full display. Yet over time, this violence accomplishes what gentleness could not. It removes entire headlands, creates caves and arches, isolates sea stacks, reshapes coastline continuously. The current configuration temporary, though it appears permanent, each rock and arch eventually destined to collapse, their material joining sediment on the ocean floor, where it might eventually become new rock, cycles continuing. The John Day River flows 284 miles entirely within Oregon without a single dam, making it one of America's longest undammed rivers, draining 8,000 square miles of high desert and canyon country. The river's free-flowing character preserves its natural dynamics, flooding during spring snowmelt, dropping to low flows during summer, moving sediment downstream without impediment, supporting native fish populations and habitat that remains relatively unaltered. The John Day cuts through the Columbia Plateau, carving canyons through basalt layers hundreds of feet thick, exposing geological history in cliff faces where lava flows stack like pages. The river's watershed includes the John Day fossil beds, where tributaries expose formations containing 40 million years of evolutionary history. The main stem sees relatively few visitors compared to more accessible rivers, its remoteness protecting while also limiting appreciation. Rafters and kayakers who do visit experience a river operating by largely natural rules. Camping on gravel bars that flood and shift with annual high water, navigating rapids that change character with flows, encountering wildlife that regards humans as unusual rather than constant presence. The John Day represents increasingly rare example of river functioning as rivers evolved to function, uncontrolled by concrete, responsive to weather and season, connected to its floodplain and watershed in ways dammed rivers cannot maintain. Its value partly ecological, but also as a reference point, a reminder of what rivers were before we decided they needed managing. Mount Thielsen reaches 9,182 feet as a volcanic plug whose summit spire shows evidence of repeated lightning strikes, the fulgurite-covered rocks fused by electricity into glassy formations, earning it the nickname Lightning Rod of the Cascades. The mountain's pointed summit makes it the highest feature for miles, attracting electrical discharge during storms, each strike leaving its signature in rock, melted momentarily before cooling into glass. The summit spire itself represents the hardened core of an ancient volcano, the conduit through which lava rose, now exposed after softer surrounding material eroded away, standing as monument to the fact that what seems solid and permanent, volcanic cones, eventually yields to erosion, leaving only the most resistant portions. Thielsen displays dramatic glacial erosion on its northern face, ice having carved a deep amphitheater that exposes the mountain's internal structure, layers of lava and ash representing separate eruptions. The southern side retains more intact profile, erosion there less severe, the asymmetry typical of mountains where glaciers formed primarily on north-facing slopes, where snow accumulated deeper and persisted longer. Climbers consider Thielsen's summit challenging, loose rock, exposure, the final summit pinnacle requiring careful movement. The mountain stands between Crater Lake and Diamond Lake, visible from both, its sharp profile distinctive, instantly recognizable. Geological processes having sculpted it into form so iconic that it serves as symbol for the region, appearing on maps and promotional materials, its shape becoming synonymous with this part of the Cascades. The Kalmiopsis Wilderness preserves 179,000 acres of the Siskiyou Mountains, where ancient rock formations over 140 million years old support rare plant communities, including the Kalmiopsis liachiana shrub, found only in this region. The rock formations consist of serpentine and peridotite, ultramafic rocks from Earth's mantle that normally remain buried, but here reach the surface through tectonic processes that exposed deep crustal and mantle materials. These rocks weather into soils toxic to most plants, high magnesium, low calcium, heavy metals that poison typical species. But specialized plants evolved tolerance, adapting to conditions that exclude competition, creating communities dominated by species that elsewhere would be outcompeted, but here thrive through their unique adaptations. Kalmiopsis liachiana itself, a small evergreen shrub with pink flowers, grows nowhere else on Earth. Its entire global population restricted to serpentine soils in this wilderness. The Siskiyou's complex topography and geology created conditions that allowed species to persist through ice ages when other regions became uninhabitable. The mountains serving as refugia, where lineages survived to repopulate broader areas when climate moderated. This history makes the Siskiyous disproportionately important to Pacific Northwest biodiversity, their species richness exceeding most regions, their role in evolution and biogeography recognized by scientists, even if general public remains largely unaware. The wilderness sees relatively few visitors despite, or perhaps because of, its remoteness and difficulty, trails steep and rugged, access points scattered, the area preserving its character through inherent resistance to easy visitation. Wizard Falls Fish Hatchery on the Metolius River raises up to 5 million fish annually using spring water that maintains constant 48-degree temperatures. The springs producing 300 cubic feet per second of flow that emerges from porous volcanic rock after decades of underground filtration. The hatchery takes advantage of water's natural stability, temperature consistency, allowing fish growth rates that can be predicted reliably, clarity reducing disease transmission, abundant flow providing oxygen and removing waste. The facility raises primarily trout and salmon, species native to Oregon waters, fish destined for stocking in lakes and streams throughout the region to supplement wild populations and support recreational fishing. The hatchery grounds include viewing areas where visitors can watch fish at various life stages, from tiny fry barely recognizable as fish to adults ready for release, the progression demonstrating how quickly fish grow under optimal conditions. The Metolius itself flows past the hatchery in channels so clear that every stone on the bottom remains visible, water that looks almost artificial in its purity, lacking the slight turbidity most rivers carry. The springs that feed both river and hatchery emerge from the same aquifer, water that fell as snow or rain on distant mountains, percolated through hundreds of feet of porous basalt, emerged finally at this location after journeys measured in years or decades through underground darkness. The Painted Cove Trail at John Day Fossil Beds winds through hills containing volcanic ash deposits from eruptions occurring between 7 and 33 million years ago, each layer representing specific eruptions that buried ancient ecosystems. The trail surface itself consists of bentonite clay, weathered volcanic ash that becomes slippery when wet, expanding and contracting with moisture content, making the trail impassable during and immediately after rain. The hills display extraordinary colors, reds and purples, yellows and oranges, greens and grays, each hue indicating different mineral content and weathering conditions. Red layers formed when iron oxidized in warm, well-drained soils. Green layers indicate iron in reduced form, formed in waterlogged conditions. Yellow suggests minerals like jarosite formed through specific weathering processes. The layers dip and fold, tectonic forces having deformed these soft sediments after deposition, creating curved patterns that add visual complexity. Walking through the Painted Cove feels otherworldly. Colors too saturated, forms too sculpted, landscape appearing artificial though entirely natural. Geology creating art without intention or awareness. The bentonite clay that makes walking difficult also preserves fossils exceptionally well, the fine-grained sediments allowing detailed preservation of leaves, seeds, bones. Anything buried in ash falls before decomposition could claim it. The trail remains short by necessity, the clay's instability limiting how far paths can be maintained, but the brief walk provides sufficient immersion in this ancient landscape where time layers visibly, where Oregon's past lies exposed in colorful bands that erode gradually, revealing their contents grain by grain. Blue Basin in the John Day Formation displays badlands carved into bright blue-green claystone, where paleontologists discovered Miocene epoch rhinoceros, pigs, and horses preserved in volcanic ash falls. The blue color comes from celadonite, a mineral that forms when volcanic ash weathers under specific conditions, creating hues unusual enough that the basin draws visitors for color alone, though the fossils add scientific significance to visual appeal. The Badlands topography, deeply eroded slopes with sharp ridges and narrow gullies, forms in clay-rich sediments where vegetation struggles to establish itself, leaving slopes vulnerable to erosion that proceeds rapidly during the occasional rainstorms that strike this normally dry region. Each storm removes another layer, exposing fossils that might have remained buried indefinitely, making the Badlands self-revealing, their erosion continuously bringing new specimens to light. The basin sits in a landscape where geology tells stories spanning tens of millions of years. The blue-green layers represent one chapter. Adjacent red and tan layers represent others, each formation documenting specific time periods and conditions. The creatures whose fossils emerge from these layers lived in landscapes unrecognizable as Oregon, subtropical forests and grasslands when the region sat at different latitudes, before plate tectonics moved the continent north, before volcanic activity built the Cascades, when the Pacific Northwest existed in a fundamentally different state that only fossils now document, bones and teeth being the primary evidence that these worlds ever existed. The Leslie Gulch area contains volcanic ash formations weathered into pinnacles and hoodoos over 15 million years. The rhyolite tuff eroding into castellated walls rising 300 feet above the Owyhee Reservoir. The formations display warm colors, oranges and reds, creams and tans, that glow dramatically during sunrise and sunset when low-angle light emphasizes texture and relief. The tuff formed from explosive volcanic eruptions, ash falling hot enough to partially weld together, creating rocks stronger than typical ash deposits, but still soft enough to erode relatively easily. Water and wind carved the current forms, pinnacles where harder layers cap softer material, protecting it temporarily. Walls where vertical fractures allowed erosion to work into the formation. Alcoves where softer layers weathered preferentially, creating caves and shelters. The area supports specialized plant communities adapted to alkaline soils and extreme temperature swings, desert heat in summer, bitter cold in winter. Bighorn sheep navigate the cliffs. California bighorn reintroduced after native populations were extirpated, their presence now well established, populations growing slowly in this remote habitat. Leslie Gulch sees few visitors despite its dramatic scenery. Access requires driving rough roads through remote country, the final miles rough enough to discourage casual tourists. This difficulty preserving the area's character while preventing the kind of heavy use that would require management infrastructure, incompatible with the landscape's wild nature. Opal Creek Wilderness protects 20,000 acres of old-growth forest, where Douglas fir and western red cedar exceed 1,000 years in age, some trees reaching 250 feet tall with diameters over 10 feet. These forests represent what the Pacific Northwest looked like before industrial logging. Ecosystems structured by trees that were already large when Columbus sailed, that survived fires and windstorms and diseases through combinations of luck and adaptation. The old-growth character creates conditions unavailable in younger forests. Canopy so complex that dozens of layers stratify between ground and treetops, dead-standing trees providing wildlife habitat, fallen logs serving as nurse logs for new seedlings, an architecture built over centuries that young forests cannot replicate. Opal Creek itself runs clear over bedrock and boulders, water reflecting green from overhanging vegetation, pools deep enough for swimming though cold enough to take your breath. The creek fed by springs and snowmelt from mountains upstream. The wilderness designation came after decades of controversy, logging companies viewing the trees as economic resource, conservationists seeing ecosystem and watershed values that exceeded timber prices, debates that eventually resolved in favor of protection, though not before significant acreage was logged up to the wilderness boundaries. The preserved forest now serves as reference point, example of what mature Pacific Northwest forests contain and support, their complexity and productivity offering insights into ecological processes that clear-cut and replanted forests never fully recover. Old growth being not just old trees, but entire systems that require centuries to develop. The Mackenzie River maintains remarkably clear water, with visibility often exceeding 50 feet, fed by springs emerging from porous lava flows that naturally filter water over decades of underground travel. The springs emerge cold, in the low 40s Fahrenheit, and incredibly pure, having passed through hundreds of feet of volcanic rock that removed sediment, organic matter, essentially everything except water, and dissolved minerals. This clarity makes the Mackenzie popular with divers who come to explore underwater landscapes where every detail remains visible. Rocks, logs, fish, aquatic plants. The experience more like flying than swimming. Water so transparent, it becomes nearly invisible, except where light catches ripples on the surface. The clarity also makes fishing challenging. Fish can see anglers as clearly as anglers see fish, requiring stealth and skill that less transparent waters forgive. The river supports native trout and salmon populations, though dams complicate salmon runs, blocking access to historical spawning grounds, requiring fish ladders and hatchery supplementation to maintain populations. The Mackenzie influenced fly fishing development in America, local anglers developing techniques and boat designs. The Mackenzie River drift boat that spread throughout the West, becoming standard equipment for guides floating other rivers. The river's character reflects its volcanic origins. Cold, clear, stable flows maintained by groundwater, characteristics that emerge from geology rather than weather, making the Mackenzie reliable when other rivers flood or run dry. This reliability contributing to its popularity and its role in regional fishing culture. Pilot Butte rises 511 feet above Bend as a cinder cone formed during eruptions 200,000 years ago, now surrounded by the expanding city, but preserving its volcanic structure and summit views. The butte represents one of hundreds of volcanic vents scattered across central Oregon, most considerably older than Pilot Butte, some much younger, the landscape demonstrating ongoing volcanic activity over millions of years. The cinder cone shape, steep sides, circular base, summit crater, formed as erupting lava fragmented into airborne particles that fell back around the vent, piling into a cone that grew taller as eruptions continued. The summit crater marks the vent itself, now cold and peaceful, supporting vegetation where lava once fountained. A road spirals to the summit, each switchback gaining elevation, views expanding with height until the top reveals panorama encompassing the Cascade Range from Mount Hood south to Mount Bachelor, the city of Bend spreading across the high desert plateau, the Deschutes River Canyon cutting through volcanic rock. The butte serves as landmark, its profile recognizable from throughout the region, city residents using it for orientation, describing locations by their position relative to the butte. The surrounding development creates contrast. Geological feature formed over days or weeks of eruption 200,000 years ago, now hemmed by human construction that appeared in decades, timescales incompatible yet juxtaposed, reminders that landscapes contain multiple histories operating at speeds that differ by orders of magnitude. The Cascade Lakes Highway passes 11 natural lakes within 50 miles, each formed by different geological processes, including glacial carving, volcanic damming, and fault block movements creating basins. The lakes display different characters reflecting their origins and settings, some deep and cold in glacially carved cirques, others shallow and seasonal in volcanic depressions. High-elevation lakes maintaining snow on shores into July, while lower lakes warm enough for summer swimming. The highway itself climbs from Bend at 3,600 feet elevation to Cascade Lakes at 5,800 feet before descending westward, the route providing access to wilderness that would otherwise require long hikes or remain inaccessible to most visitors. Each lake attracts specific uses and users, some popular with anglers seeking stocked trout, others with campers seeking solitude, high lakes drawing mountaineers using them as base camps for peak ascents. The lakes share volcanic origins broadly, but differ in details. Some occupy craters, others formed behind lava dams, still others fill glacially scoured basins subsequently modified by volcanic activity. The highway closes in winter when snow makes it impassable, typically November through May or June, depending on snowpack, the closure period when the lakes exist in winter conditions. Frozen, snow-covered, accessible only to those willing to ski or snowshoe miles from plowed roads. This seasonal closure preserves winter character, preventing the kind of year-round access that would fundamentally alter how these lakes function ecologically and experientially, their winter isolation allowing them to remain wild in ways that continuous access would compromise. Hetita Head Lighthouse sits 205 feet above the Pacific on a headland composed of 40-million-year-old basalt, its beam visible 21 miles at sea, making it one of the coast's most powerful navigational aids. The lighthouse began operation in 1894. Its construction, requiring materials transported by ship and then carried up cliffs by workers who built roads, structures, living quarters, entire infrastructure necessary to maintain a light station in remote location. The light itself used a Fresnel lens, revolutionary technology that concentrated beam through precisely ground glass prisms arranged in concentric rings, creating light intensity that exceeded previous designs by orders of magnitude. The lighthouse automated in 1963, no longer requiring resident keepers. Though the station remains active, its light still guiding ships along coastline that has claimed hundreds of vessels over centuries of navigation. The headland provides habitat for seabirds nesting on cliffs where terrestrial predators cannot reach, colonies of moorys and gulls occupying ledges, their calls audible above wave sounds. Gray whales migrate past the headland during spring and fall, their spouts visible from the lighthouse when whales surface close to shore. The station sits within Hesita Head State Scenic Viewpoint, protecting the lighthouse and surrounding landscape. Trails providing access to beaches and viewpoints where the lighthouse appears against Pacific backdrop. White tower on headland above breaking waves, composition photographed thousands of times yet somehow never exhausted, each combination of light and tide and weather creating variations on theme. The Sycan Marsh in southern Oregon encompasses 30,000 acres of wetlands at 4,200 feet elevation, supporting populations of sandhill cranes and migratory waterfowl in a high desert watershed where wetlands occur rarely. The marsh forms in a broad valley where streams spread across relatively flat terrain, water moving slowly enough to allow sediment deposition and vegetation establishment, creating marshland rather than open water. The sandhill cranes that nest here represent success of conservation efforts. Populations that had declined to concerning levels have recovered through habitat protection and management. Thousands of cranes now using the marsh during breeding season, their calls carrying across the wetlands, prehistoric sounds that have echoed through similar landscapes for millions of years. The marsh demonstrates the importance of wetlands in arid regions, disproportionate ecological value compared to their area, supporting biodiversity far exceeding surrounding sagebrush uplands, providing ecosystem services including water filtration, flood control, groundwater recharge. The area experiences extreme temperature variations, summer heat exceeding 90 degrees, winter cold dropping below zero, daily temperature swings of 50 degrees, not unusual during spring and fall. Yet life thrives, species adapted to these extremes finding the marsh hospitable despite conditions that seem harsh. The marsh's protection came through combination of public land designation and conservation easements with private landowners, voluntary agreements that maintain working ranches while preserving wetland functions, demonstrating that conservation and economic use can sometimes coexist when approaches remain flexible and acknowledge that landscapes contain multiple values simultaneously. Natural Bridge on the Rogue River demonstrates how water carved through fractured lava, flowing underground for 200 feet through a lava tube before re-emerging downstream during most flow conditions. The bridge formed when surface lava cooled while liquid rock continued flowing beneath, creating a tunnel that water now uses, the river temporarily disappearing into stone before reappearing, the gap between points where water enters and exits the tube varying with flow. During high water, the river overwhelms the tube and also flows over the bridge, but during normal flows, only the subsurface passage carries water. The tube itself extends beyond the section that currently carries water, portions blocked or collapsed, the visible flowing section representing a fragment of larger tube system that formed during the original lava flow. The area around Natural Bridge shows other volcanic features: rough lava surfaces, smaller tubes and caves, surfaces textured by processes that occurred when the rock was molten. Trees grow where soil has accumulated in cracks and depressions, pockets of earth supporting forests and landscape otherwise dominated by barren rock. The bridge attracts visitors who walk out onto the lava formation, peer into the opening where river enters stone, listen to water flowing beneath their feet, the sound muffled by rock but audible as reminder that the apparently solid surface conceals voids, spaces where water moves unseen, geological architecture more complex than surface appearance suggests. Yaquina Head. Outstanding natural area preserves a basalt headland formed 14 million years ago through underwater volcanic eruptions. The exposed layers showing pillow lava formations, characteristic of submarine flows. The pillows formed when lava erupted into ocean, the water cooling the outer surface instantly into glassy rind while interior remained molten, pressure causing bulbous shapes that stacked atop each other, frozen in forms that record their underwater origin. Tectonic uplift later raised the headland above sea level, exposing rock that formed under ocean to air and erosion. The uplift continuing slowly, the coast gradually rising or sea level gradually falling, depending on how you frame the process. Relative motion between land and sea, creating the current configuration where headland stands 70 feet above Pacific, waves breaking against its base. Tide pools at the headland's edges contain remarkable diversity. Sea stars in multiple species and colors, anemones that close when exposed but open underwater, revealing tentacles that capture prey, urchins, chitons, crabs, fish trapped in pools during low tide, entire ecosystems existing in depressions that ocean covers twice daily. The headland supports the tallest lighthouse in Oregon, 93-foot tower necessary because the headland sits lower than many coastal points, requiring additional height to project light sufficiently far seaward. Seabirds nest on the headland, including common murreys that crowd onto ledges in colonies thousands strong, their density creating cacophony of calls that carries above wave sounds, birds launching into air and returning constantly, feeding at sea and returning to nests, activity that continues from dawn to dusk throughout breeding season. The Trask River in the Coast Range drops 2,000 feet in 45 miles through heavily forested watershed, receiving up to 180 inches of rainfall annually, creating conditions supporting massive Sitka spruce growth. The watershed's rainfall comes primarily from Pacific storms that dump moisture as they hit coastal mountains. The Coast Range's orientation, perpendicular to prevailing weather systems, maximizing precipitation, some storms delivering inches per day for days at a time. This moisture supports rainforest conditions, moss covering every surface, ferns dominating understory, trees growing to sizes that seem implausible until you see them directly. The Trask itself varies dramatically with season. Winter flows can exceed 10,000 cubic feet per second during storm peaks, river transforming from stream to torrent, moving boulders, reshaping channels, demonstrating water's power when concentrated and moving. Summer flows might drop to 100 cubic feet per second, exposing gravel bars and allowing safe wading where winter floods made approach dangerous. The river supports salmon and steelhead runs, fish migrating upstream to spawn in tributaries, populations that have declined from historical levels but persist, maintained through combination of natural reproduction and hatchery supplementation, their presence testament to the watershed's continued ability to support these species despite logging, roads, and other changes that have altered the basin over past century. Abiqua Falls drops 92 feet into a horseshoe-shaped amphitheater carved from columnar basalt, accessible only by scrambling through a narrow canyon where moss-covered rocks create microclimate. The trail, really a rough route, requires crossing the creek multiple times, climbing over and around boulders, following paths that aren't always obvious, the difficulty limiting visitors to those willing to work for the destination. This difficulty preserves the fall's character, preventing the crowds that would degrade experience at more accessible locations. The amphitheater itself formed through combination of water erosion and rock collapse, water gradually undermining the basalt until sections fell. The fallen rock carried away by floods, leaving this curved wall behind. Columns form the amphitheater walls, hexagonal pillars that cooled from a lava flow, thick enough that slow cooling allowed crystal structure to organize geometrically. Moss covers columns in green layers inches thick, water seeping through rock keeping surfaces perpetually damp. Conditions perfect for moss species, adapted to constant moisture and low light. The falls themselves vary seasonally. Spring runoff creates impressive flow that fills much of the amphitheater with spray. Summer reduces flow to a thin ribbon that allows close approach to the base without getting drenched. The confined space creates acoustic effects, water sounds reverberating from stone walls, amplified and modified by the amphitheater shape, creating soundscape as remarkable as the visual scene, the falls engaging multiple senses simultaneously. The high desert between Bend and Burns receives just 10 inches of annual precipitation, creating sagebrush ecosystems extending across millions of acres interrupted only by isolated mountain ranges. The aridity creates landscape immediately recognizable, gray-green sagebrush dominating, few trees except along watercourses, grasses between shrubs turning golden brown by summer, overall palette of subdued colors that might seem monotonous until you spend time and notice the variations. Different sagebrush species occupy different niches. Big sagebrush in deeper soils, low sagebrush on shallow rocky sites, silver sagebrush in areas with higher water tables. These distinctions might seem subtle, but structure the ecosystem, each species creating specific conditions that favor certain animals, insects, birds. The high desert supports remarkable bird diversity during breeding season. Sage grouse performing elaborate courtship displays on traditional leks, sage thrashers nesting in shrubs, horned larks on open ground, ferruginous hawks hunting from soaring flight. Winter brings different species: rough-legged hawks from Arctic, snow buntings, occasional snowy owls. The desert demonstrates that aridity doesn't equal lifelessness, that 10 inches of rain can support complex ecological communities when organisms adapt appropriately. The adaptations become visible when examined. Sagebrush's aromatic leaves containing compounds that reduce water loss and discourage herbivores. Animals obtaining water from food rather than drinking. Activity patterns shifted to dawn and dusk when temperatures moderate. Crack in the ground near Christmas Valley extends 2 miles long, up to 70 feet deep, and just 10 feet wide as a volcanic fissure formed 1,100 years ago, when cooling lava flows contracted and split. The crack formed not from tectonic forces, but from thermal contraction. As the thick lava flow cooled, it shrank, stress accumulating until the rock fractured, splitting along lines of weakness, opening this narrow chasm that extends much deeper than it appears from above. Walking through the crack provides unique perspective on geological processes, walls displaying flow textures from when rock was molten, surfaces rough and fractured, the narrowness creating sense of enclosure, unusual in high desert landscapes typically characterized by openness. Temperature within the crack remains cooler than surrounding desert, the depth and shade creating microclimate where ice sometimes persists into late spring despite summer heat baking the surface. The crack demonstrates that volcanic landscapes continue changing long after eruptions cease, cooling and contraction proceeding for years or decades. After lava solidifies, secondary features developing as the rock adjusts to its final state. The area around crack in the ground includes other volcanic features: lava tubes, small vents, rough AA surfaces, evidence of eruptions that occurred recently enough that erosion hasn't significantly modified original forms, the landscape appearing caught between eruption and equilibrium. The Willamette meteorite weighs 15.5 tons, discovered in Oregon in 1902 after traveling from space, the largest meteorite found in North America, and now displayed at New York's American Museum of Natural History. The meteorite consists primarily of iron-nickel alloy, composition typical of objects from asteroid belt, fragments from collisions between larger bodies that shattered eons ago. Scientists estimate it entered Earth's atmosphere perhaps 13,000 years ago during the last ice age, surviving the heat of atmospheric entry due to its size and metal content, impacting somewhere in what is now Montana or Canada, then being transported to Oregon by Missoula floods, the same catastrophic ice age floods that deposited soil in Willamette Valley. The meteorite shows regmaglipts, thumbprint-like depressions formed during its passage through the atmosphere, heated surface material ablating away, leaving these characteristic marks. Native peoples considered it sacred, the Clackamas calling it Tomanawos and incorporating it into spiritual practices. The meteorite's discovery led to legal disputes over ownership, eventually resolved in favor of Oregon Iron Company that found it, though the company subsequently sold it to museum, removing it from Oregon permanently. The meteorite represents material older than Earth itself, fragments from the solar system's formation that orbited for billions of years before colliding with our planet. Visitors touching it, connecting physically with objects that predate not just human civilization, but life itself, matter forged in different stellar processes than the rocks beneath our feet. French Glen sits at 4,200 feet elevation in the Blitzen Valley at the base of Steens Mountain, where Donner and Blitzen River creates riparian oasis surrounded by sagebrush desert and alkali flats. The settlement began as a ranch headquarters in the late 1800s, named for its founder, growing slowly into a community that now serves primarily as gateway to Steens Mountain and Malheur Wildlife Refuge. The elevation and latitude create climate extremes. Summer temperatures regularly exceeding 90 degrees, winter cold dropping well below zero, daily temperature swings of 40 degrees common during spring and fall. Yet the river provides enough water to support willows, cottonwoods, meadows, green corridors through otherwise brown landscape, vegetation drawing wildlife that uses the riparian zones as habitat islands in the surrounding desert. The area's remoteness preserves its character. Nearest city hours away, services minimal, human population counted in dozens rather than hundreds. This remoteness appeals to visitors seeking isolation, landscapes uncluttered by development, night skies dark enough to see Milky Way clearly, silence deep enough to hear coyotes calling miles away. French Glen represents what much of the West once resembled: small settlements separated by vast spaces, human presence subordinate to landscape rather than dominant, communities existing at the land's permission rather than imposing themselves upon it. Crater Lake accumulates an average of 43 feet of snow annually at its rim, though the lake itself never freezes due to its depth and thermal properties, maintaining surface temperatures above freezing. The snowfall occurs primarily from November through May, when Pacific storm systems deposit moisture on the Cascades. Crater Lake's elevation and exposure making it one of the snowiest locations in Oregon. The snow accumulates into drifts that can exceed 50 feet in sheltered areas, building throughout winter into masses that require into July or August to melt completely. The lake's failure to freeze despite being surrounded by such snow demonstrates the thermal inertia of deep water. The lake's enormous volume holds heat from summer, releasing it gradually through fall and winter. The mixing that occurs as surface water cools and sinks, distributing this heat throughout the water column, preventing temperatures from dropping to freezing. During the coldest periods, thin ice might form near shore where shallow water allows rapid cooling, but the main lake body remains liquid. Steam sometimes rising from the surface when air temperatures drop far below freezing, while water temperature remains in the upper 30s. This temperature difference creates fog that hovers over the lake, obscuring it from rim viewpoints. The fog itself evidence of the lake's warmth relative to surrounding air. The snow preservation into summer makes Crater Lake accessible only during brief periods, the rim road opening fully in July most years, remaining open until first major fall storms close it again in October, the window of complete accessibility lasting just 3 or 4 months annually, the lake existing in winter isolation for the majority of each year. The Pueblo Mountains in southeastern Oregon reach 8,632 feet at Pueblo Peak, an isolated range supporting populations of California bighorn sheep in steep canyons and alpine meadows. The mountains rise from surrounding basin floors at 5,500 feet, creating 3,000-foot escarpments where the range faulted upward, tectonic forces lifting one side while leaving the other relatively stable. The uplift exposed ancient rocks, limestone, sandstone, and volcanic formations representing hundreds of millions of years. The elevation creates climate zones from desert at base to alpine near summits, compressed vertical zonation, similar to Steens Mountain, but in a more compact, isolated massif. The bighorn sheep population represents successful reintroduction. The native population was hunted to extinction. The current animals descended from individuals transplanted from California. Their adaptation to Nevada and Oregon, ranges demonstrating these animals' ability to colonize suitable habitat when given opportunity. The sheep navigate cliffs that appear vertical, their hooves and balance allowing them access to terrain where predators cannot follow. This ability to utilize precipitous habitat being key to their survival strategy. The pueblos see even fewer visitors than Steens, despite similar dramatic relief, their remoteness, and lack of improved access roads keeping them obscure, preserving wilderness character through sheer distance from population centers and difficulty of approach. Watson Falls drops 293 feet through an ancient lava flow in the Umpqua National Forest, its plunge pool carved gradually through resistant basalt over thousands of years of continuous erosion. The falls rank among Oregon's highest, water dropping in a single long plunge rather than cascading over multiple steps, the free fall creating plunge pool dynamics where water hits with force, concentrated in relatively small area, excavating rock through combination of hydraulic action and abrasion from rocks and sand carried by the water. The basalt through which water carved this feature formed millions of years ago from lava flows that cooled into hard, dense rock, the columnar jointing typical of slowly cooled basalt visible in cliff faces near the falls. The trail to the falls climbs gradually through old-growth forest, the path maintained but natural in character, Douglas fir and western hemlock providing canopy, sword ferns dominating understory, the forest filtering light into green-tinged shade. The falls become audible before they're visible, sound carrying through forest, building anticipation as you approach. The viewing area provides perspective from partway up the falls, water dropping above and below the platform, spray reaching platform during high flows, the position allowing you to feel the fall's power while remaining safe from the danger that approaching the base would entail. The falls flow year-round but vary dramatically. Winter and spring runoff creating thundering cascades, summer diminishing flow to ribbons still impressive but gentler. The seasonal changes giving the falls different personalities depending on when you visit. The Wallowa River flows 55 miles from Wallowa Lake through a canyon it carved over millennia, dropping 3,000 feet before joining the Grand Ronde River in northeastern Oregon's deepest valleys. The river's gradient, roughly 60 feet per mile, makes it swift and powerful during runoff, capable of moving large rocks and reshaping its channel during floods, though by late summer flows diminish to levels allowing easy crossing on foot. The canyon itself cuts through layers of Columbia River basalt, cliff faces displaying the stacked flows that built the plateau through which the river now incises. The Wallowa supports salmon and steelhead runs despite dams on the Snake River downstream complicating passage. Fish must navigate multiple dams to reach the Wallowa, their persistence testament to the strength of instinct that drives them to return to spawning grounds despite obstacles that would seem insurmountable. The valley the river carved widens in places where softer formations allowed lateral erosion, narrowing where harder rocks confined the channel. This variation creating patchwork of meadows and narrows, gentle reaches and rapids. The Wallowa's name comes from the Nez Perce people who inhabited this region for thousands of years, before being forcibly removed in the 1870s, the landscape retaining their naming even after they were gone. Geography remembering what history tried to erase. And with these final revelations, we close our journey through Oregon's hidden landscapes, through the patient work of time, written in stone and water, through the quiet persistence of forces that build mountains and carve valleys, through the slow conversations between fire and ice, between uplift and erosion, between all the elements that shape this corner of the world, into the forms we've explored together tonight. May these geographical truths carry you gently into sleep, knowing the earth continues its work while you rest. And so we've wandered through Oregon's patient landscapes, from volcanic peaks that still remember their fire, to desert basins that once held ancient lakes, from coastal cliffs where stone meets the ocean's endless argument, to hidden canyons carved silently through millions of years. Each place we've visited tonight exists not as a finished thing, but as a moment in processes too vast for human timescales to fully comprehend. Lava flows cooling over centuries, waterfalls cutting backward through stone at inches per decade, glaciers advancing and retreating in rhythms measured across millennia. Oregon's geography teaches us that the ground beneath our feet participates in conversations far older than our species, dialogues between tectonic plates and erosive forces, between the heat rising from Earth's core and the rain falling from passing storms. The state contains its contradictions without resolving them. Rainforests and deserts sharing the same latitude, volcanic fields younger than written history, lying beside rocks older than complex life, waters that flow to distant oceans, and waters that evaporate without ever leaving their birth valleys. These landscapes ask nothing of us except perhaps attention, perhaps recognition that we are temporary witnesses to permanence that only appears permanent, that everything we've explored tonight is still becoming, still transforming, still engaged in the slow work of geological time. The mountains will continue rising grain by grain while erosion removes them particle by particle. Rivers will keep cutting their canyons deeper while also filling them with sediment. Coastlines will retreat inland while new land forms from volcanic eruptions yet to occur. All of this continues, whether we observe it or not, whether we sleep or wake, the earth keeping its own time, writing its own stories in languages of stone and water and wind. Rest now, knowing that the patient work of the world continues in darkness as in light. The geography is not what has been, but what is always becoming. That the landscapes we've explored together will be different tomorrow than today, though the changes remain too subtle for eyes to catch, too gradual for lifetimes to measure, yet absolutely certain, absolutely ongoing. The earth faithful to processes that began before consciousness arose to witness them and will continue long after consciousness departs. Sleep well, and let the slow rhythms of geological time carry you gently into dreams where mountains rise and rivers flow, where the world makes itself new through patience we can barely imagine, through forces we can name but never fully grasp, through the quiet persistence of stone and water, writing stories that will outlast all our words. Good night.